Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Nezu saw something in Deku Part 2. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 3, comment down below. And let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story InsomNyaC from 𝐬𝐻. So let's start the video. Izuku winced as Recovery Girl placed the cold metal of the stethoscope against his bare skin. Apparently, when the teachers had spotted him struggling to breathe on the camera, they had called Recovery Girl into the site. The only reason that she had turned up at their base, instead of being rushed to the site where he had collapsed, was because Tsu had found him first and helped him stabilize his breathing. She pulled the instrument away. "Well, your heart rate is still rather elevated, but your breathing sounds nice and strong now. That being said, you are no longer allowed to go out in the field for the rest of the exam on your own. Doctor's orders." Izuku winced. That would not be too hard to work around, even if it was less than ideal. "I understand." "You better. Now I am going to have to insist that you tap out for the rest of the night and get a good night's sleep. If you have anything else that you were planning for the night to do yourself, you are not doing it." Izuku nodded. "No, nothing big tonight. I can sleep it off. I was fine, really. You didn't need to come into the test site." Recovery Girl sighed. "You know, there are times when I can't help but see you as Toshinori's boy, and this is one of them. Just because you were able to walk away under your own power does not mean you are okay. The brain is just as capable of suffering from illness and injury as the rest of you. If you ever feel too badly stressed out by the test, there is no shame in stepping back to have someone fill in for you so you can recover." Izuku felt his gaze drifting down to his hands. "I know, I just wasn't expecting Uraraka to be so mean about things. This is all just a game, and I am playing a role, you know, but she is acting like I want to actually hurt people." Recovery Girl patted him on the leg. "I am going to fill you in on something I have learned as both a hero and a doctor. Sometimes you don't really meet someone until you meet them on a battlefield, because people will always show their true colors when they are scared shitless. The fact that she is lashing out like this verbally just goes to show how scared she is of what you are doing. While under normal circumstances, I would say to take that as a sign to dial it back a bit. Given the nature and the reason for the test normally, I would say you are doing a good job in the role you were assigned. After all, real villains would not go easy on your classmates, so if you are going to make this a realistic scenario, you are doing a good job." Izuku gave a watery smile to her. "Thanks. I think I needed to hear that." She gave a fierce nod. "Good. Now I am going to head out. You better go straight to bed, young man." "I will." "𝐲𝗏, you should probably go to bed now. Ken has an eye on the kids. They all seem to be bedding down for the night anyways." 𝐲𝗏 gave his husband a weak glare before sighing and pulling himself to his feet. "I'm still spending the night here in case of an emergency." Hisashi snorted and held out his sleeping bag to him. "I know. I'll bring you a nice cup of coffee in the morning while I enjoy our nice soft bed all alone." 𝐲𝗏 huffed. "You can't guilt-trip me into leaving. It is bad enough that Midoriya had a panic attack, bad enough that we had to send Recovery Girl into the test site to look him over. I am not leaving until all my kids are out of the test." Hisashi, the bastard, lit up. "So you admit it. You are attached." 𝐲𝗏 huffed and buried his face in his scarf as Ken laughed at his expense. "Yamada has a point, Aizawa. You nearly died for those kids. I would be more surprised if you weren't. Now get some rest. I can watch the cameras. Trust me to look after your kids like I am trusting you with mine during daylight hours." 𝐲𝗏 snatched up his sleeping bag. "It still feels wrong trying to go to bed this early." Ken snorted. "And it feels weird for me to be staying up so late. Doesn't change the fact that it is better for you to be up when Midoriya and Monoma are up than it is for me. If one of their plans goes wrong, you being rested and at the top of your game is important." especially with Midoriya's quirk being like it is. Sleep. I'll fill you in the morning about anything you might have missed. Katsuki waved to Raccoon Eyes. I've got the phones. Go get some fucking sleep. She yawned and rubbed her eyes. Ugh, thanks. The last couple of hours have really sucked. How the hell are you so awake already? Katsuki snorted as he slid into his seat. Unlike all of you apparently, I am a fucking morning person. I am normally up around this time every morning anyways. I'm more surprised I stayed up so late last night. She snorted in return. 9 at night is not late. Katsuki gave her a smirk. It is when you wake up at 4 in the morning. Now go sleep so you aren't fucking useless all day. She gave him a smile. Night Bakugo. And then Katsuki was alone again. Just how he liked his mornings. After he finished checking over Raccoon Eye's logs of the night, he stood back up and started clearing some space for his morning ritual of a quiet workout. He would not be going out on his morning run until Glasses woke up in a few hours at 6 to take over, but that was fine. It was extremely unlikely that the villains were going to be doing anything at such an early hour anyways with so many of the two classes' night owls on one team. That was one issue that Katsuki had realized when he and Shitty Hair were working out patrol schedules. Out of their class, of the people remaining on the hero team, only 2 were night owls. Sure, Katsuki and Glasses were the only morning people in the class, but most of the class clearly struggled to stay up later than midnight too. It meant that Raccoon Eyes and Pikachu were the only 2 who could take the late graveyard shift, and with Pikachu currently under suspicion, that only left Raccoon Eyes to take the phones. He was in the middle of push-ups when Pikachu stuck his head in. Oh, did Mina go to bed already? Katsuki stopped and popped back up to his feet. Yeah, about 20 minutes ago. Where the fuck were you? Your patrol should have ended a while ago. Pikachu looked embarrassed. I might have gotten a bit lost. Everything looks pretty different this late at night. Vlad-sensei took mercy on me a few minutes ago and gave me directions back after he realized I was completely lost. As much as he didn't trust Pikachu to not be at least working for the villain team, he did have to admit that sounded rather believable. Especially when he had gotten turned around a couple of times on the practice patrol he had done with the extra with the tail earlier before they had brought in Deku's cousin. Just go to fucking bed. You need to be up again by noon. You don't want me to do my post-patrol report? What are you even going to put in it? I got fucking lost for over 4 hours. If something had happened, I figured you would have led with that. Pikachu was very red in the face now. Ah, right. Night Kaken. He bolted before Katsuki could retaliate for the nickname. He hated that Pikachu had picked up the habit of calling him that from Deku so fast. If it wasn't for the fact he had started with that shit back before the sports festival, he would have considered it evidence of him potentially being on the villain team. The guy knew he didn't like anyone but Deku calling him that but did it anyways. Apparently, he thought it was only fair since Katsuki liked to, jokingly, insult the rest of the group of extras that hung out around him. It wasn't like Katsuki was ever going to admit the real reason he did it. That he genuinely struggled to tell people apart, and the nicknames were how he kept people straight in his head. It was easier when they were all in costume, but when everyone was all in uniform until he heard their voices or saw them use their quirk, half the time, Katsuki had no idea who he was fucking looking at. There were exceptions, of course. Major visible mutations were easier for him, but he wasn't going to tell Raccoon Eyes she was one of the few people he could easily recognize. Besides, he was pretty sure she liked the nickname he gave her since it was apparently an insult she had not heard before regarding her alien looks. He internally winced as a thought occurred to him. Deku knew. There was no way he didn't after knowing Katsuki for so long. Did the idea for the uniform for the villains come from him? Surely he would have realized that Katsuki at least would not be completely fooled by the full body coverage. It was probably why they had gone to such lengths to disguise the voices and body language of Death and Tower. If it had just been one of their classmates doing a voice, Katsuki would have still known it was them. It was something to think about later though. For now, he had a workout to finish that hopefully would not be interrupted by the phones. It was odd waking up so early. Even having made a habit of doing morning runs since All Might had started training him, Izuku was still at his heart a night owl. In hindsight, that had likely been one of the worst contributing factors to Izuku making himself sick trying to follow, but improve upon All Might's original plan. Once All Might had shifted things, so he was doing more of his working out after school hours instead of before. He had felt so much better, and things had only improved after Izuku took fully over his own workout planning and reduced his morning workout to just his daily run. He was still probably not getting nearly enough sleep normally, but his mom would have flipped if he had taken up running in the late evening instead. It was one thing to start running while it might still be a bit dark out, and another thing when it only got darker as you ran. Still, since he was up and wide awake after the early night, there was no reason to not take his morning run now. "And where do you think you are going?" Izuku jumped slightly at the voice behind him. "Ah, Shiozaki, you startled me." She gave him a mildly disapproving look. "Didn't Recovery Girl say you weren't allowed to go out alone for the rest of the test?" Izuku blushed at the reminder. "Yes. I thought it would be okay if I did my run this morning still. I am pretty sure that there aren't many people up yet." She shook her head. "Wait here, I'll change into my gym uniform." Izuku nodded and began to do some more warm-up stretches while he waited for her to get back. The moment she returned, they slipped out onto the streets at a casual jogging pace, though Izuku kept his eyes peeled around them for any of the heroes on an earlier morning run of their own. It was not likely they would see any with how few morning people there were between the two classes, and even by that standard, it was stupid early. To Izuku's complete unsurprise, they completed the short impromptu 5K without running into any of the heroes. As Izuku began to run through his cool-down stretches, he gave Shiozaki a questioning look. "So why are you up so early anyways?" She gave him a pointed look. "After you were sentenced to an early night's rest, we eventually realized that you would wake up before everyone else, so of the few of us that qualified as morning people drew straws for who would get up a little earlier to stop you from potentially going against Recovery Girl's orders. That being said, even if we had not drawn straws for it, I likely would have gotten up anyway. It is not much earlier than I normally wake, as it is the case with both Ieyasu and Kaibara." Izuku winced at the reminder of the time. "Sorry, all the same. So what do you do this early normally anyways?" "Gardening and tending to my vines. It is better to water twice a day, once at the start and once at the end after all. I suspect my quirk has led me to develop my sleeping patterns based around getting the maximum amount of sun. If I have extra time after that, and perhaps a morning workout, I like to spend the extra time with my art." Waking up was odd for Tsu. For one, she was not being woken by the sounds of her younger siblings, but by the sounds of Ochako and Toru trying to quietly get ready for the day without waking Mina, who had likely only been asleep for a few hours. Secondly, she was waking for the first time with the knowledge of the fact that they were no longer her teammates for the exercise. Last night had been interesting, albeit not terribly informative, about what was now expected of her as a member of the villain team. Midoriya had not gotten a chance to really hash out a plan for what she should be doing with Monoma before Recovery Girl had turned up and forced him to bed early. Still, she had learned the answer to the biggest mystery about the villain team. Who was all on it? Answer. Surprisingly, there was only one mole with the heroes in Aoyama, who had accidentally tripped his way into being completely cleared of suspicion by pure chance. With the hero team convinced that the villain team leaders were hiding in plain sight on their own teams, they had blinded themselves to the possibility of the truth. The villain team leaders were hiding among their underlings. She had also learned the reason that Kirishima had not ever consulted her for her input on the situation, that she was a suspect for being the villain team leader for their class. She had to wonder if Midoriya would want her to play that role for the heroes later on. For now, though, she was here among the heroes playing along, as if she was still on their team. Perhaps she would get a chance to talk with Aoyama about things later, if they ended up on a shared patrol. It was something to possibly look forward to. 𝐲𝐴 hated mornings. There was little getting around that fact. It was something that his friends had learned early on about him during his time at UA as a student, and the lessons they had learned from that carried on to this very day. The most important one. 𝐲𝐴 was not to be woken without an offering of coffee. 𝐲𝐴 opened a bleary eye to the smell of the heavenly beverage that Hisashi had likely woken up early to prepare for him, as was their normal morning ritual. This morning, however, broke with tradition slightly, as 𝐲𝐴 registered the stiffness in his back from sleeping in his sleeping bag on the floor all night, and the sounds of other voices. 𝐲𝐴 ignored them for now as he unzipped his sleeping bag enough to grab the coffee that Hisashi was sitting on the floor next to him holding. After a long drag of the hot liquid, 𝐲𝐴 demeaned himself human enough to figure out what was going on. Nezu and 𝐀𝐻 were talking. Neither seemed agitated, so nothing had likely happened while he was out cold. Beside him, Hisashi snickered. "You awake yet, Shu?" 𝐲𝐴 blearily looked at his husband. "No." As Hisashi laughed, he took another sip of his coffee. "There is more coffee where that came from." 𝐲𝐴 decided to ignore his ridiculous spouse in favor of the other two. "What time is it?" 𝐾𝐻 cast a glance off to the side. "Just before 7. Most of the hero team kids are starting to get up by now, but only Asui, Aoyama, Midoriya, Shiozaki, Kaibara, and Yaoyorozu are up on the villains, though the first two are likely only up because of the heroes waking up. Midoriya and Aoyama are texting, while most of the guys in the heroes believe Aoyama is busy fussing with his hair and doing his skincare routine, which, to be fair, he is actually doing as he texts. 𝐲𝐴 nodded at the update. "So he knows about Asui's team shift last night then?" Nezu cheerfully nodded. "Midoriya is updating him about that now." "Yes, as well as giving him orders to pass along to her and how they should handle each other." 𝗲𝗛𝐻𝗋 is now on our team." "Is that even allowed?" 𝗲𝗛𝐻𝗋. Converting a true hero to the villain team was an optional objective, so yes, I need you to inform her to slip away to meet with me when she gets the chance, since I wasn't able to really talk to her about what she should be doing last night. Avoid patrolling together alone. For now, if you can help it without making it obvious, she will help with your kidnapping later on, so when that time rolls around, make sure you are set to patrol together alone. Otherwise, continue as you have been will do. Tetsu was bored. Ever since early this morning, he had been stuck playing guard for the bank on the B side of the city because of a supposed planned robbery and hostage situation at one of the two major banks in the faux city. It wasn't that he didn't trust his buddy Kirishima to not try and give them bad information, but with how they had gotten the information. Well, Tetsu had to agree with Kendo that it seemed like a trap or a red herring. The man they had gotten the information from was intentionally given up by the villain team. Honestly, it would have been smart to not give the guy accurate plans for what they had planned for the test, so they didn't have to worry about him telling the hero teams anything. Of course, there was also the chance that they were banking on the heroes to assume the information was bad, and were going to do it anyway. That was why he was here. Kendo had assigned him the post by himself, trusting him to be able to at least stall long enough for backup to show up if push came to shove. He had positioned himself up on the roof of a nearby building to watch the front of the building out of sight, but so far nothing. A flash in the corner of his eye drew his attention. Tetsu snapped his head around to spot movement on a roof, not far away on the opposite side of the street. The opposite side of the too wide street for him to get over to without alerting the villain. Scratch that. Without alerting the villains. He immediately tapped on his comms. "Guys, I have sights on 3 of the hands." He squinted, trying to ID all 3. "Looks like strength, Emperor and Empress." A voice crackled to life in his ear. "𝐸𝐴. Copy that, real steel. Mudman and 𝐸𝐻 are already heading your way." "Where are they?" A few roofs over on the other side of the street. He paused as he finally registered their location. Shit. They are on top of the commission building. They must be going for the commission representative. Correct. 𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧 froze as a familiar voice came from behind him. He whipped his head around to meet the masked face of Todoroki, leaning slightly over his prone form. Before he could do much more than activate his own quirk, he found himself encased up to his chest in ice, completely unable to move. The boy far too casually held up his left hand to 𝗧𝗧𝗧's ear with a calm in it before pain erupted over his face as he saw flames licking across his head. Understandably, he screamed. Thankfully, his reaction was enough for Todoroki to withdraw his hand and replace it with a just as painful cold of his right side. I'm sorry. Recovery girl will be here shortly. He paused. Oh, the teachers want me to inform you that you are now considered dead, so if your teammates happen to find you before she does, you aren't allowed to say anything about what happened. Happened to why wouldn't they? Because you were talking with 𝗫𝐿, not 𝗫𝐿. 𝗧𝗧𝗧 winced. You guys hacked into our comms again? Todoroki hummed in agreement. I think you would find keeping Hatsune out of them a rather futile gesture. Your spies keep letting her back in then? No. I am not sure how she does it though. You would be better off asking Nezu or 𝗬𝗃𝗺 if you didn't want to wait to hear her explain. Is your face feeling better? 𝗧𝗧𝗧 gave a jerky nod. What was that for anyways? Surely if you wanted to kill me, you had other options that would have hurt less. Todoroki shook his head. Not with your quirk. Either we would have had to deal you a lot of concentrated force in one spot, wear you down until your quirk stopped working, or cause a temperature differential to make your steel brittle. Melting you was the easiest to do safely to prevent long-term damage. As it is, you are still probably a bit burned on that side, but hopefully I kept the temperature low enough so we do not have matching scars. That startled a laugh out of 𝗧𝗧𝗧. Shit, that shouldn't be so funny, dude. I already have to deal with guys in our school saying I am the inferior version of Kirishima with how alike our quirks are. The last thing I need is people comparing me to you. Todoroki cocked his head slightly, as if he was listening to something. Ah, Midoriya wishes for me to inform you that your quirk is way harder to counter than Kirishima's. That is why he had to use me against you, since besides himself and Monoma copying my quirk, there was no one else on the villain team that could really even hurt you. I was the obvious choice to use with that under consideration, since my quirk control would have been the best. Midoriya is listening in? Isn't he busy across the street? Midoriya is rather good at talking while he works, especially when quirks are involved. Besides, he was just taken along with 𝗏𝐾𝐦 and 𝐍𝐴ce to help open doors and carry the body, since it is faster when he does it. The body? It took them far too long to realize something was wrong. Kendo winced as she ripped her eyes away from the dummy standing in for 𝗧𝗧𝗧's body. It was far too realistic for all that it didn't look anything like him. It was intentional, she knew, since the teachers had warned them about the body dummies that would replace the dead people killed by the villain team. But this was worse than she was expecting. The body had been encased in solid ice before the head had been cooked, had been cremated. The flesh substitute material was gone, leaving just the ceramic bone of the skull blackened with heat. There was no question, at least, who had done it. Fighting down bile, she dialed her phone with the other agency's number. A agency? How can I help you, mon ami? Can't stop twinkling. It's Battle Fist. Can you put me through to Red Riot? We have a problem. The hospital morgue was crowded, even with just 6 people. It wasn't because the room itself wasn't a decent size, but because real steel had not been the only body found. The villains had been busy. 2 more dead heroes and the head of the city's office of the HPSC missing, and they hadn't even had a clue it was happening. Zero's body had similarly been found after they had realized he wasn't reporting in during the rushed roll call after 𝗧𝗧𝗧's body had been found. Given that his dummy had been dropped off the edge of the building, He had been keeping watch of the bank, sitting on with no sign of him, using his quirk to either fight or try and catch himself. Masharao had to control himself to keep his tail from moving and his own fear bubbling up. They have Shinso from the sports festival on their team. He brainwashed Zero into jumping off the roof. Kendo shook her head. It might have been Monoma, but I think you are right about his quirk being used. I mean, it makes sense why they would recruit him given that he made it to the tournament bracket, but his presence is concerning. Aoyama, who had been looking rather green looking at the bodies, averted his gaze up towards the ceiling. He would probably be Judgment then, would he not? Given the colors and the fact that he would likely have been able to pose for pictures with Mike Sensei the easiest. Shota shook his head. In hindsight, it should have been obvious that Shinso was at least one of the outside class recruits. Judgment was far too prominent in the group to have just been some other random kid from Gen Ed or support. He probably asked to have an important position in the group for them to recruit him. Kamakiri growled slightly and spun away from staring at the body of his apparent close friend. Damn it. They can't keep doing this to us? We outnumber them. No, we don't. Kirishima's voice cut through them all like a knife. Kendo shot him a worried look. What do you mean? There are still, she trailed off. Oh, shit. Masharao quickly looked between them. What? What is it? Aoyama sighed. They realized that the villains now outnumber the heroes, even with one of their number captured, 21-18 with the spies. Still, even without, they now would regardless. Kendo shared a quick look with Kirishima. Change of plans. How big is your agency? Most of the bigger potential targets are on your side of the divide. He frowned. Big enough. You can't seriously be saying what I think you are saying. We aren't abandoning half the city just because they have gotten the drop on us twice. She shook her head. I don't want it any more than you do, but right now we are easy pickings divided like this. We can retake the B side later on once the numbers are more in our favor. As it is, we are spread too thin. No one should be partying alone from now on. As Yasuhiro sat in his cell listening to the panic going on in the building above him, he felt a laugh bubbling up in his chest. These poor kids had no idea what was coming for them if some of the ideas that Izu had thrown around were actually on the table. Tsu only managed to slip away due to the confusion of the two groups combining into one. Thankfully, she only needed to go over a few streets. Midoriya met her in the stairwell. Oh good, you're here. Here, put this on and talk for me. We need to tune the voice modulator to work with your voice. Tsu took the choker-like device without question and snapped it on. So there, she cut herself off momentarily as she registered the voice coming out of her own mouth sounding male. Oh, this is weird, Kiro. How does that even work? Midoriya pointed at the one around his own throat. It sits on top of your vocal cords and vibrates to modulate your voice up or down in pitch. Now just keep talking. It doesn't have to be about anything in particular. I am just tuning you into close to the right frequency. Judge will do final adjustments if needed before you go hopefully, but if he isn't back in time to, well, it should still do the job. What job is it for, Kiro? I have been wondering what the plan is for me since last night. Is there a reason you are trying to tune my voice a specific? She cut off again as the smooth timbre of Tower's voice escaped her own lips. Oh, Midoriya grinned. Basically, we are going to prove the hero's theory about you being the possible villain leader right. Don't worry about them catching you as a villain team member if you need to play the card early since we will bust you out with Atsuhiro later. But if you can hide it until it is time to kidnap Aoyama, that would be great. And when will that be, Kiro? Midoriya pulled out a phone from his pocket to check the time. Not long now. If all goes to plan, the two of you should have a patrol together tomorrow. You just need to hide that you are Tower until the two of you leave on that patrol. After that, you can follow Aoyama's lead on that since we practiced his kidnapping a few times before the test. Theoretically, you won't need the voice modulator until it is time for the broadcast. but I thought it was better to get it to you sooner rather than later. He grabbed her hand and brought it up to the device, so her finger found a small switch on it. That is the on-off, so you know how to switch it later if you need to, but for now, I would just leave it on and pull it off since your costume's neck is not high enough to hide it. Sue nodded and pulled it off to tuck it into one of the pouches on her belt. Anything else, 𝐬𝐻? I should probably get back before they realize I am gone. Midoriya shook his head before giving her a thumbs up. You should be good. Thanks again for agreeing to join us. You have no idea how much easier this makes things. Of course. What are friends for? The smile she got in return was one of the most open and happy that Sue could ever remember seeing from Midoriya. It was a rather bittersweet realization to have she realized, as she slipped back into the confusion, that was the Hero B agency move into a agency's base of operations. After all, as happy as she was to see him clearly happy talking with her, it was tainted with the realization that despite Midoriya being a good friend with her and the others from their normal lunch group, he clearly had not trusted all of them to show his true face to them until this test had worked him up into such a state that he had a complete breakdown when he probably realized that he had been right to at least a degree. While she did not know what exactly Uraraka had said to Midoriya, whatever it was had clearly been taken extremely personally. That was not okay, and now she was left wondering if their friend group had been permanently changed in the wake of it, even if she did not know it yet. Of course, it had probably already changed with Midoriya's change in relationship status. It was no secret among the girls in their class that Uraraka had been crushing hard on Midoriya since day one. Even setting aside the villain reveal yet to come, that was still likely would have changed something, if only because she likely would have felt hurt about him hiding his boyfriends and girlfriend from the group. A pair of fingers snapped in front of her face. Yo, Earth to Froppy. You in there? Sue blinked away from the box she had been clearly staring at for a while to meet the gaze of Kaminari. Sorry, 𝐬𝐻. She made a show of rubbing at her eyes. I did not sleep well last night, and now I am having trouble focusing. Oh, mood? I mean, not last night obviously, but it was kinda hard for me to sleep after I got back in this morning since everyone waking up and moving around kept waking me up. You have trouble sharing a room with the other girls, or was it something else? She shrugged and opened the box up to start unpacking it. I normally sleep with my window open this time of year to listen to the cicadas. I didn't realize that not being able to hear them would make it hard to fall asleep when I am fine the rest of the year without them. Toshinori was glad that he would likely not have to see young Midoriya for a few more days. At this point, he wasn't sure how he would have acted around him otherwise without the time to process things. He was also not sure how he would explain what he was doing right now to the boy either. Not after avoiding meeting with the boy's mother for so long directly out of concern at first that she would have stopped him from passing down the quirk. Especially since with the recent revelation, Toshinori was no longer 100% sure that it had been the right choice. It was not that he didn't believe that the boy was a true hero at heart, but that was no longer the only factor in the equation. Between the clear blood close connection with Shigaraki and the revelation that All for One was possibly still alive, Midoriya Inko opened the door shortly after his first knock, drying her hands on a kitchen towel in her hands, Toshinori likely having interrupted her while she was preparing to make herself dinner. Can I help you? Midoriya Inko? My name is Yagi Toshinori. I am one of your son's teachers at UA. I was wondering if I could come in and ask you a few questions about him. The small woman narrowed her eyes at him. All of my son's teachers are pro heroes. Who are you? He tried to give her his best reassuring smile. I'll show you if you let me inside. If it is all the same, I would rather not activate my quirk while in plan view, but perhaps this will be enough for you. He finished out his hero license, something he had not had to use in decades, himself as All Might being a household name these days. She took the license and seemed to momentarily lock up as she saw the civilian name printed in small font below his picture. placed and sized just so that a hero could show their license to a civilian without revealing their own civilian name unnecessarily. She looked back up at him, slightly dumbstruck, before moving aside and gesturing him inside. "Can I ask what happened to you, All Might?" Toshinori winced as he took his license back and put it back in his wallet. "I fought a powerful villain about 6 years ago and suffered a major injury. It is part of the reason I am teaching at UA now. I was hoping to transition into teaching so my retirement from heroics here won't be a complete shock to everyone in a few years. But the time I can work in my more heroic form is getting shorter and shorter faster than I was expecting." "Does Izuku?" "Your son knows, yes. But most of his class still does not, since I have yet to figure out how to reveal my current real state without making them panic." That got a look of confusion. "And you had no such worry with Izuku?" Toshinori blushed and gave a nervous blush. His discovery of my condition was not originally planned, even if him knowing has admittedly been helpful in covering things up with his classmates. I happened to meet him for the first time while I was almost out of time on my transformation and failed spectacularly at running away from him to power down. He can be very stubborn when he wants something, as I have come to realize." That earned an amused smile. "Very true." Her smile dropped. "But you are not just here to talk about that. I assume you are not here in an official capacity for UA, or I suspect that they would have sent another one of his teachers that I would have recognized surely and obviously. This doesn't have to do with what is going on with Izuku during his test, since if something that important happened, UA would have called to inform me on an incident first, if Atsuhiro did not beat them to it." Toshinori sighed. "True. Officially speaking, nothing major has happened during the test that I am aware of that needed to be brought to your attention. But unofficially, this test has brought a few questions about your son to my and a few others' attention. Namely, the suspicion we have of a highly probable blood relation of his to the villain who gave me my injuries. Given that our only known family of yours that we have are your adoptive ones, we were wondering if you would agree to a possible DNA test to check to see if the villain in question is related to him through you, since your birth parents are unknown, or his biological father. Additionally, I was curious if you could provide the identity of the man in question, since as far as I know, young Midoriya doesn't know who he is." There was a long pause before Miss Midoriya sighed and shook her head. "Actually, I do know who my birth parents are. My mother left me a letter to open when I turned 18. I'll go dig it out here in a moment. As for Izuku's father, he's Salamander. At the time I slept with him, I was unaware that he was already married, so cut my losses when I realized that fact after I discovered he had gotten me pregnant with Izuku. It took a second for the name to ring a bell. That is one of 𝗫𝗏𝗏's sidekicks, correct?" She nodded. "We met while I was coordinating with 𝗫𝗏𝗏's agency over a property damage claim. He seemed nice enough at first that I humored him when he asked me out for drinks. I found out about his wife and son on my next visit. Excuse me, I'll go find that letter. Take your time." As she opened a hallway closet and started pulling out old photo boxes, briefly turned to 𝐀𝐦 a puzzled look. "So who is this villain you think Izuku and maybe I am related to? Besides dangerous, I mean." Toshinori considered that for a moment before deciding that given the connection that young Midoriya had with One for All Alone, she deserved to know just as much as young Midoriya did as a possible target. "He goes by the name All for One. He has been around for a long time and is far older than he seems. Among the many crimes he has committed, he also killed my mentor Shimura, Nana." Toshinori locked up. "How?" The woman, whose face was now drained of blood, gave a slightly hysterical-sounding laugh. "What are the odds? Your mentor and my birth mother being the same person." She opened the box in her hands, and a yellowed envelope flew up out of it and into her newly freed hand. She held it out for him. Dumbstruck, Toshinori took it. He didn't have to open it to know the contents would confirm it. After all, he would know Nana's handwriting anywhere. Izuku hated how easy all this was. It should not be this easy to fool his classmates like this, to manipulate them into what he wanted them to do. Tricking the heroes into consolidating their forces like this had made the whole day a walk in the park, as their actions on what they referred to as the B side of the divide, as the heroes were too spooked by what had happened that morning with Zero and Tetsu. Additionally, the confusion of the quick move had made it easy to tag all the point targets that belonged to 𝐬𝐻 that the heroes had brought with them with the tracker rounds and tags to ensure that they knew the locations of all the objectives in case they moved them later after Tsu's betrayal tomorrow. The remaining few that the heroes had mistakenly left behind in the evidence locker were quickly claimed for some easy points. It seemed that they only took the evidence that was marked as being clearly linked to the hands, but not all of it. To be fair to the Class 1B heroes though, how were they supposed to know that the All Might Bunny-themed Kigurumi was relevant to the case? One of the many things that the villain team had to do in preparation was provide evidence that linked their civilian identities with their villain. Basically, they each had to pick an item to represent themselves for the heroes for them to later recapture for points. The items had probably seemed rather random given that all the ones belonging to Class 1 had ended up in B agency and vice versa. After all, how were the students of 1B to know to link the collection of photos taken of a conspiracy board about noodle shops being related to Todoroki, or want to know that the box set of old horror manga was for Yanagi? Answer: they weren't supposed to. That being said, if said objects were viewed by those in the same classes as the villains, they would have been quickly identified. Of course, there were also some red herrings thrown in by Nezu to mask the true meaning, such as what Hitoshi had been amused to reveal was one of his dad's hair scrunchies, and an otherwise empty wallet with a picture of Midnight's cat Sushi. Additionally, there was the extra layer of difficulty in the fact that the evidence wasn't all filed as such. The reason that the handful of items remained at the agency was due to them being in the agency's lost and found, and thus getting written off as unimportant. Izuku was just slightly relieved that Aoyama's item, a brown fedora, had been deemed as not important enough to take. To be honest, Izuku was not sure that even many of his own class would have connected the hat to the boy. He had explained his choice as representing the fact he was playing the spy, as fedoras like that were common in old Western fictional spy media, and, as a hat, it also represented his love of fashion. Still, Izuku was much happier with the hat being in their possession. Hanta yawned at his seat at the desk in front of the camera setup. Being dead was somehow even more boring than he had expected it to be. To make up for dying before the test was over, they had to peer review what the others did for the rest of the test right and wrong. According to Shishida from 1B, as well as their upperclassmen who had been taken out on the first day during what should have been their own final embedded in their own, today had been a much slower day on the parts of the villains. Apparently, they had done a lot that the heroes had yet to see or hear about, such as converting a Sui to the villain team. Zero was not sure how he felt about that one, or the fact that apparently, up until he died, he had been a suspect for the villain team leader and spy when the actual one a leader was Midoriya, and the spy was Aoyama, who was clear of all suspicion. Mayte grumbled as he clicked through the feeds. Apparently, after hearing some of the things he had said about the girls from the two classes, the girl Hado had gone to Nezu to get the boy banned from any feeds that had any of the girls in them. Additionally, to his own surprise, Mayte was apparently being reviewed for repeated misbehavior and sexual harassment. That wasn't to say Zero didn't think that Mayte didn't deserve it, especially after the incident in the locker rooms with that hole in the wall, but he was surprised that the teachers were actually doing something about it. After all, given how Aizawa-sensei started the year by threatening to expel someone, the fact that Mayte was still in their class after so long had led him to believe that maybe Aizawa-sensei either couldn't or wouldn't for one reason or another. As it turns out, he was kinda right. Apparently, after Aizawa-sensei expelled his whole class at the start of the year last year all in one go, the school board revoked his ability to do so without them reviewing the student first. Normally, given what Mayte had been doing, This would not have been an issue as far as Sensei was concerned, since he did actually manage to justify his actions last year to them, that the expulsion for the course stuck for all of them, and only a handful clawed their way back in before the end of the year from Gen Ed after learning their lesson. The problem, however, lay with Mintia himself. The reason? Minta's father was a high-ranking member of said board. Because of that, and the fact that up until the test began, Minta had been smart enough to not get caught clearly on cameras harassing the girls of their class. He had been able to get away with it with his father defending him. Now though, Sensei had view proof, not only from the short 2.5 hours that the boy had been in the test, but from how he had spoken in this room too. After all, while they were no longer being tested on their physical performance, they were still being tested and thus monitored. If 𝐍𝐸 was completely honest, he wouldn't miss him. Sure, 𝐍𝐸 liked girls as much as the next straight or bi guy, but he knew that that kind of behavior would never win him any favors with any girls. Besides, it wasn't very heroic behavior either. Oh, that's interesting. 𝐍𝐸 perked up from his thoughts to look back at Tagata. What's up? The blonde boy pointed at his own screen. Takoyami is out in the open walking straight for an agency. Toshinori felt very out of place in his powered-down form as he followed his newly self-proclaimed little sister toward 𝗫𝐻𝑡's agency in search of Salamander to get to the bottom of things. The past several hours had been a lot for him. Sure, she did not really think of Nana as her mother actively as such given her own adoptive mother, but she had seemed slightly amused by the idea of introducing young Midoriya to him as his recently discovered uncle, since she had seen right through himself in regards to his own feelings for the woman in question. Still, as happy as he was about the new familial connection that he had been granted with his boy, a part of him was disappointed to only hold the title of uncle. It was only fair, especially with the fact that even if there had been no connection, there had been zero chance of him stepping into their family as the woman's husband to become his boy's father, between the fact that not only was he apparently was not really 𝐀𝐻𝐸's type, but there was the rather major factor of his own sexuality at play, or lack of one as it were. As much as Toshinori had a soft spot for romantic stories, the idea of actually being with someone sort of skeeved him out. At least the squeaky clean brand image of him as All Might had helped act as a buffer from having to deal with questions like that too often. Still, a part of him regretted not talking with 𝐀𝐻𝐸 sooner, but another was half wishing that they had still never met after she had reamed into him about giving her son one for all after what had happened to Nana. He was drawn from his thoughts by 𝗫𝐻𝐸's voice. Please don't tell me someone is trying to start a frivolous lawsuit against us again because they don't have proper villain insurance. 𝐀𝐻𝐸 waved off the hero, who was clearly just coming back from patrol, from how he stood at his own agency doors flanked by a few of his sidekicks. No, I am not here for that today. I was wondering if we could talk with Salamander about something personal. That earned a few groans, snickers and eye rolls from the crowd as 𝗫𝐻𝐸 just facepalmed and held the door open for them. Let me guess, personal suit from a woman who is accusing him of being the actual father of her child again. Toshinori felt his eyes widen. Wait, does that happen often? More than I would like, unfortunately. Thankfully, so far all but one of the accusations he has gotten about actual paternity have been proven to be false. That one belongs to his now ex-wife. For as bad as he is about sleeping around, he is rather good about remembering to use protection. 𝐀𝐻𝐸 just snorted, clearly not too worried about revealing the real reason they were there in front of the man's boss and colleagues. My son sort of proves otherwise. Toshinori was surprised to see 𝗫𝐻𝐸 balk slightly at that. Pardon, 𝐀𝐻𝐸 crossed her arms with a shrug. I never brought it up with him because it hardly mattered, given that as far as I was concerned, he was just my son's sperm donor. It was not like I needed the additional financial support. If it wasn't for recent developments regarding concerns about his family history on that side of the family, both Izuku and I would have been more than content ignoring the connection. 𝗫𝐻𝐸 was grimacing now. He's still out on his own patrol, but follow me back into my office. Perhaps I can clear whatever it is up. As 𝗓𝐬𝐻 closed the door behind them, he shot 𝐴𝑡𝑢Shinori himself a questioning look. "And who are you, and what do you have to do with this mess?" 𝗏𝑡𝑢Shinori bit his lip. It was not that he did not trust his fellow hero with the truth, but he knew it would likely be a bit of a shock. He glanced back at the door to double-check that the other man's sidekicks were not eavesdropping before briefly powering up and dropping the form again to not burn too much of his time. "Sorry for the slight deception, but 𝐀𝐦 and I thought it would be better if I didn't attract every news crew in several blocks radius to your agency with how sensitive the topic of the matter is." Looking quite stunted, the other hero fell into his chair. "All Might, what the hell happened to you? You look like he is missing 2 vital organs and is terrible at looking after himself." "Don't worry, if I have anything to say about it. My brother isn't going to drop dead on us anytime soon." Somehow that seemed to surprise him even more. "Brother? All Might, I thought that you were an orphan." 𝗏𝑡𝑢Shinori flushed. "I mean, I was and still am. My mentor, who was as close to a mother as I ever had, was 𝐀𝐻's biological mother. 𝐀𝐻 just considers me just as much her adoptive brother as the brother she grew up with because of that fact." 𝗓𝐬𝐻 took the time it took for 𝗏𝑡𝑢Shinori himself to explain to recompose himself. "Right. Thank you for trusting me with this, since I assume it is a safe assumption that none of this is known by many people, given I'm sure people would at least panic if they knew about your current health. I'm guessing this is the real reason why you decided to try and take up teaching at UA." 𝗏𝑡𝑢Shinori sighed and nodded. "I was hoping that by doing so, my upcoming retirement from heroics would come as less of a shock." 6 years ago. The 6 months you took off. It was for those injuries, wasn't it? Why the hell did you not take off longer?" 𝗏𝑡𝑢Shinori winced at the very pointed comment. "You saw how the public reacted to the news that I was going to be gone for even those 6 months. Yeah, and the other heroes and I held the country together just fine in your absence. Hell, we still are, since you clearly never got back up to your old normal hours." 𝐀𝐻 patted 𝗏𝑡𝑢Shinori on the arm as she shot the other man a pointed look. "As a reminder, we did not come here to talk about his health. You said you might be able to help us answer some questions about Salamander's family history." He pinched the bridge of his nose and nodded. "Right, sorry. Yeah, I would probably be the better person to ask anyways, since I doubt he has ever given more than a passing thought about that sort of thing since Nenha and Shuichi cut contact with him a few years back. To clarify, since we are laying out all the cards on the table, Salamander is my half-brother on our father's side. Let's just say that our father was just as bad about sleeping around as he is, and leave it at that." 𝗏𝑡𝑢Shinori felt a strange wave of relief at that. Relief with the bizarre realization that there was actually a chance that the number 2 hero was related by blood to his arch-nemesis, because if he was, then a revelation about the relation to the villain in question on his own boy's part could not be justified as being enough to disqualify him from his future of being the hero that 𝗏𝑡𝑢Shinori knew him to be. A realization that left him silently realizing that the man across from him did in fact carry some features in common with the monster that haunted his own dreams. They were small features that were easy to look past, but they were there. The man's general silhouette and jawline, his proud and stubborn nature, the coldness in his eyes when he was mad. They could be just a coincidence that he was finding himself reading too much into, but he was jolted from his thoughts by the appearance of Salamander opening the door and tugging off his mask, revealing a mess of red curls that jarringly 𝗏𝑡𝑢Shinori was horrified to realize was both identical to not only his boy's, but all for one's as well. 𝗵𝐸𝐻 was extremely nervous, a fact that he hoped that Dark Shadow would not give away as he walked as casually as he could in full villain gear right towards the hero's stronghold. This would be his moment in the metaphorical spotlight as he played distraction, while the rest of his team worked to set up the stage for tomorrow morning in the darkness created by the now set sun. The 2 of them had to get all of the heroes' eyes on him, or there would be the chance to actually lose more teammates in the game tomorrow during the kidnapping and breakout if things went wrong. They would only get the one shot at it, since there was no way that the heroes would fall for the trick for a 3rd time. As it was, he was uncertain that they would fall for it this time, even with Midoriya's assurances. He let out a calming breath behind his mask. Like magician, he was being set up as a pawn to be taken. Unlike the man he carried hidden on him, their means of escape. It'll be fine, 𝐬𝐬. We will be the ultimate agents of darkness. Just try and stay in character. He shivered slightly at the dark chuckle his shadow gave as they peeled away from his body, their form now dwarfing him under the cover of darkness. A shiver at the reminder that he was hardly the one in control right now. Come out wherever you are, little heroes. It's time to play 𝐴𝐻𝐿. A familiar snarl burst from the building as Bakugo appeared in the doorway, shrugging off the hand of Kirishima, who had clearly failed to rein him back in. Are you ready for me to beat your asses again, bird brain? Dark Shadow's grin twisted in an unsettling way. You are forgetting something, Bakugo. The night is our domain. Why aren't you stopping him? Ijiro turned to Kendo with a clear look of defeat painted on his face. You heard him. Bakubro has made up his mind and clearly has no plan on listening to us anymore. One of the remaining Class B boys, his name was Shoulder Right, peeked out the door. He knows it is probably a trap, right? That there is no way that they are out there by themselves alone. Ijiro winced, but before he could comment, Kaminari cut in. I mean, he is kinda right though. That we are just going to lose if we just let the villains do what they want without challenging them. He is also banking on the fact that Deku would have cut a deal with the villain team so that he could be the one to take Bakugo out himself. Something that, given what Midoriya said before he even picked the villain team officially, I have to agree as being likely. Ijiro turned back to Ida, who stood at one of the neighboring windows. Now that you mention him, I don't think we have really seen Midoriya since this whole test started. It is kinda odd. He was cut off by a shockwave that blew out the glass of the doors and windows. Yuga winced as the glass at the window he was at shattered, thankful for the protection of his fashionable glasses of his costume. He had suspected, much like the rest of his team, that Bakugo would not hold back once he realized just how powerful Dark Shadow was at night. But this seemed excessive. He blinked as he registered the fact that despite the light from the blast, that Dark Shadow was still somehow overpowering Bakugo. Or perhaps not. Oh dear, this could be a problem. How were they supposed to break Compress out if the pair won their fight that they were planned to lose? As if hearing his worried thoughts, his phone lit up with a text from the Green Menace. La Menace vert. Back kacking up. Don't worry about the heroes reprimanding you later for going against orders to stay put. Katsuki winced as the recoil of his explosions began to make his arms ache. Clearly, he needed to add more recoil protection for the large blasts, if it was going to hurt this badly to use them, since he had overestimated their ability to finish off the living shadow in one go. He would not have the luxury of being wrong in that kind of level of misjudgment out in the real world. It fucking sucked though that he might actually lose this fucking game before he and Deku got their fight, though, because the rest of the hero teams were being cowards. After all, if Deku was going to fight him, surely he would have cut in by now. His thoughts were broken by a pained scream from the shadow, as a beam of light sliced cleanly through it. Katsuki risked a glance back to the agency to see fucking Glitter Bomb of all people was the one coming to his aid. Sorry to cut in, Mon Ami, but I believe I am the better match to shine bright against this darkness. While I play the beauty to this beast, perhaps you could capture their host. Katsuki felt his grin return more feral. That I can fucking do. Atsuhiro's eyes widened as he watched as the devil lovers were carted past his cell, not long after the sounds of nearby explosions tapered off by a smug-looking Katsuki and the smiling face of their hanged man. Interesting. His current guard, Mudman, gave him a questioning look. Not expecting that. Seeing little harm in being truthful, Atsuhiro shrugged. I had assumed I would be the only piece sacrificed in Death and Tower's game. Especially the devil lovers, given that as soon as those two handling them were out of the game, they would have been impossible for your team to stop. He considered that. Of course, perhaps that was the point. Give your team a fighting chance against them for the sake of fairness, like sacrificing myself? Mudman gave him a questioning look. You seem fairly confident that the villains are going to win. He smiled behind his mask. But of course. After all, how can your team hope to win when you have no idea who you are playing against? Sako's got a point there. We could end this test right this second honestly with how bad of a lead the villains have over the heroes. Even if the rest of the kiddos somehow manage to find and capture all of the villain team members, they've earned enough villain points, and the heroes have lost enough opportunities for points that the villains definitely won early this morning. 𝐲𝐴 watched Nezu just nod. Still, we need to let things play out. Think of it as just a good learning opportunity instead of a test. 𝐲𝐴 snorted. A learning opportunity for you. Psychological torture for the hero team students. The problem children aren't taking any half measures, and at this point, I can only assume they took your list of ways to earn points as a personal challenge to complete as opposed to just different paths to take. 𝐀𝐦, who had arrived not long before the recent fight, paled sharply. You think that they actually going to, at this point? Yes. The real question is who Midoriya is going to do it to. Why do you think we basically kicked Yagi out of here for the rest of this test? But those goals are only on there to check the villain team members' reactions to them even being on there. They can't actually do them without breaking the rules of the test about hurting their classmates. 𝐲𝐴 felt Hisashi's hand grab and tighten on his wrist. The only rule about that is to just make sure to try to not permanently maim the other students. So long as they all come out in mostly one piece and should have no long-term injuries, it is fair game. But it is literal torture, and is something that the commission has no issue in dealing out themselves to those they consider deserve it. 𝐀𝐦 fell silent under Nezu's pointed comment. 𝐲𝐴 ignored the exchange in favor of the list in front of him of the ways that the villain team could win points to read the ones left. Recover all lost items from the heroes. Prison break. Torture someone. Successful ransom of a hostage. Film a murder. Fake the death of villain. Kill all heroes to take the city. After the past 2 days, that was it. After the past 2 days, they had already committed so many things from the list that they had not been expecting. Forcing someone to commit suicide. The mass bombing. Killing all the vigilantes. Stealing all the target items. At this point, he was more wondering how Midoriya was planning on stretching things out to last the remaining 3 days. Assuming that he didn't draw out the torture of his victim for too long. 𝐲𝐴 hated the sickening feeling of relief that his son at least was safe from that as a member of the villain team. When it comes time for that, we need to be ready to interfere if Midoriya takes it too far. Hitoshi fell into the nest of bedding and electronics that his boyfriends and girlfriend had made out of their bedding in the small, more private room. So is everything ready for tomorrow then? Izuku gave a brief thumbs up, not looking up from the phone in his other hand that he was quickly testing on. You get in contact with Tsu then? Yeah, finally. She had to wait until all the girls not on night shift went to sleep before she could sneak out to meet me to double-check the voice modulator. In hindsight, I should have been the one to hang back at base earlier to meet her. Nito yawned and propped himself up. Yeah, probably. We weren't exactly thinking about that earlier, but yeah, adjusting plans for that probably would have been a good idea. Hey 10 mil. The heroes are beginning to wonder where you're at since they haven't had any sighting of you as strength yet. But real steel, he smacked himself on the forehead. Oh right, I didn't think about the fact that with us intercepting the call, that they would not have known I was involved in the kidnapping. Well, they will see me tomorrow while we do the live stream. Do we know yet who will be joining Aoyama as one of the stars? Hitoshi watched the look of clear guilt that flashed over Izuku's face at the question. I had him arrange things with Kirishima, so that Uraraka out be the one guarding Atsuhiro and Tokoyami when they break out. But it will ultimately be up to them to decide. Mei gave a noise of clear approval. Oh good. I was hoping for a chance to get back at her for making you cry. That startled a sputter out of the now blushing Izuku. May, you can't just say something like that? We are literally talking about torturing someone. Hitoshi snorted as he reached around to tug the other boy into a hug. Yeah, and we are villains. Playing villains. Nito exchanged a glance with Hitoshi. But are we? Izuku stiffened. What? Are we just playing at this point? Izuku, that speech you gave yesterday. That didn't sound like you were just playing around. You meant it. Izuku gave a clear fake laugh as he began to shake slightly in Hitoshi's arms. You guys really shouldn't joke about 10 mil. There aren't any cameras watching. It is just us. The boy immediately crumpled. You're sure? Hitsuhi snorted and nuzzled into the other boy's neck. You really think she wouldn't know? That earned a more genuine laugh. Right? Stupid question. His face dropped again. You want to do this for real. Become real villains and hurt. Help people, not hurt. Help the forgotten like your great-grandfather by working against the system that hurts them. Tear things down to build them up for the better, so no one has to grow up dealing with the shit we and our friends have faced for being ourselves. They lapsed into silence following Naito's words as Izuku seemed to consider them. How many? Hitoshi felt a smirk cross his face. Not including us? Todoroki for sure, but I would not be surprised by others. I have been very careful about feeling everyone out before coinciding approaching them. I suspect after last night that Asui might be open to things after how she acted when she found you during your panic attack, as is likely the case with your cousin, but I have not had the chance with either of them. With how naturally Aoyama has taken to spying as well, he might be one that we want to sway to our side if he is not already on it. That earned a snort from Izuku. Given how happy he was to play spy, that might not be a hard sell so long as one day he can have his dramatic reveal. The smile dropped again. I hate that not only am I considering being an actual villain, but that I want to. He gave a bitter laugh. How messed up is it that working as a villain has made me happier over the past few weeks than all the time I have put into trying to be a hero? Hitoshi tightened his hug as two more sets of arms wrapped around them. It is because who you have been pretending to be as a hero is not really you, I think, but you as Tower is. Someone who is a natural leader and planner. Not just someone who rushes in to punch things as hard as needed to stop things. But that was just a show. You can't fake a presence like yours was during your speech. Even if you might not think it was really you because you rehearsed it beforehand. That doesn't change that it was you who wrote that speech. Izuku turned slightly to look at Nito. Do you think that too? Nito made a show of rolling his eyes. Tower, do you really think I would have given up so much control over the planning to you if I didn't realize that you were better at it? His gaze dropped. Honestly, I am not even sure what I even contribute to our group. You are the mastermind. 𝐲𝐿 is the tech god and Judge is the one that knows people. Me? You are the pretty face, obviously. Nito blushed as he shoved at Hitoshi. I'm being serious. May snorted. I think so was Judge, Chance. You are our front man so that we can work without the attention falling on us. Izuku froze again as his eyes widened. Like Shigaraki is for all for one, Tamura glared at the phone in his hand as it once more failed to connect. Are you sure that the guy gave you the right number? I keep getting a number not in service message. Jiren shrugged. He probably has his phone compressed right now for some reason. I'm sure he will pick up eventually. Worst comes to worst. I can pass the message that you want to meet him when I see him next. I thought you said the guy was excited to join us for any plans on attacking you again. Why would he go no contact like this if that was true? Jiren scratched his chin. I mean, he did tell me the last time he saw me a few days ago that he was going to be working a job this week. But I didn't expect him to completely drop off the map for all of it since he hasn't done that before. I'm sure I'll get a good story out of him about it later. Remember, there is no need to rush Tamura. The summer training camp is still well over a month away. Tamura winced slightly at the gentle reminder from Sensei. I know. I am just a bit annoyed since I had thought this would be a straightforward thing from what Jiren said about this Mr. Compress guy. Toshinori watched with a hint of jealousy as the other three began to get drunk as they sought to avoid the reality of the recent revelations, now relocated to the privacy of Enji's home. The discovery of confirmation to Toshinori's own fears, as well as another jarring truth, as they worked out a full family tree. Not only were the two other heroes blatantly the great-grandsons of 𝐴ll, but their father's sister was the mother of both his own former sidekick Mirai and the woman who had married 𝐀𝐦 𝐍𝐴 biological brother. A family that had been dead for a decade and a half at this point. Well, all but one of them. Toshinori snorted to himself as he stared down at the photo of the young boy who was likely the true identity of Shigaraki Tamura. Shimura Tenko. No wonder the DNA test came back with him so closely related to Izuku. Inko gave a sad sigh as she tore her eyes off the picture of her nephew. Given that he was registered as quirkless too, do you think his quirk was also given to him? By 𝐴ll? Toshinori winced slightly. While the truth about his own quirk was now open knowledge to everyone in the room out of necessity, it was still jarring to hear someone new openly talking about it. I wouldn't put it past him. That being said, we cannot also rule out 𝐴ll paying off the boy's doctor or someone else to give a false positive diagnosis for quirklessness, and then just sat back and waited for the inevitable. Decay is an extremely volatile quirk from what little we know about it. Regardless of which it was though, I can only imagine how badly things went when it activated for the first time given the report about the destruction of the property, and the lack of human remains despite the amount of blood found. Enji dropped the tablet that he had been working on in favor of taking another swig of his beer. Do you think your sidekick knew about all of this? Now was his sister, so he should have been notified when it was discovered that she had died as his last known living family. Toshinori shrugged. If he was, he never brought it up with me, though given he knew my connection with his brother-in-law, and the fact I was avoiding learning what happened with him after our mother died to try and uphold her wishes, that might have been intentional. 𝐴ll stared blankly out over the garden. Someone is going to have to call him to at least let him know about the supervillain in our family tree. And someone not me should probably tell Shuichi too, since he won't pick up if I try to call him. Enji groaned. Shit. I just realized I am going to have to talk to Rei and the kids about this mess after Shoto and Nezuko are out of their final exam. 𝐴ll turned back to give his older brother a puzzled look. Are you sure that is a good idea? Telling Rei, that is, not the kids. Inko frowned. I'm afraid I am out of the loop on that point. Why wouldn't he? Enji grimaced. Rei is a willing long-term patient in a mental hospital. Interned her there after she suffered a mental break after we lost our eldest Tauya and attacked our Shoto, mistaking him somehow for me, which gave him that scar. He tapped his own face where his youngest son's scar sat. She has been able to check out for years now, but has always been too afraid of hurting our kids again to leave. It was only after Shoto himself started visiting a few weeks ago that she started to actually consider doing so. He's worried that she would take the revelation that I am actually blood related to a villain to twist me into something to fear again. Hisashi paused in his work rearranging funds for his planned possible capture, so that Tamura and the doctor would not have to worry about the heroes freezing all of his own accounts, following the inevitable raid on his successor's current home as an alert popped up on screen. Someone was digging into the Shimura family. How curious. He quickly traced the data download to the requesting client device and toggled the microphone on the device to transmit to his own system. No wonder the DNA test came back with him so closely related to Izuku. Hisashi froze at the sound of All Might's voice. Cross-referencing the audio with the other device's display of an image of young Tamura. Before his quirk had come in, they had to be talking about him. But who was Izuku? A woman's sigh cut in next before a voice began that he did not recognize. Likely not someone that he had come across in relation to All Might before then. given that he was registered as quirkless too. Do you think his quirk was also given to him? By All for One. Hisashi would have winced if he could as he listened to All Might's response with his own thoughts on the theory. Every day he was thankful that Tamura himself had clearly never had such a thought, even if it wasn't true. Of course, given that he very clearly manifested his quirk before actively repressing his memories of the event, that was not too surprising. Wait, quirkless too. Did that mean that Izuku was the ninth's name then? Huh. What were the odds that All Might would pick someone related to Tamura? The quirkless part was at least not too surprising given that 8th was originally quirkless himself, so it would not have been too out of character to have picked a quirkless boy himself as a successor for the quirk. Especially given that he had previously no idea that Hisashi himself was alive. It was Endeavor's voice that derailed his train of thoughts, given that he knew for a fact that the man had previously been in the dark about the truth behind All Might's quirk. Do you think your sidekick knew about all of this? Now was his sister, so he should have been notified when it was discovered that she had died as his last known living family. That was at least less of a surprise. He had known about that connection for a while, even if it was clear that the heroes talking on the other end had not. If he was, he never brought it up with me, though given he knew my connection with his brother-in-law, and the fact I was avoiding learning what happened with him after our mother died to try and uphold her wishes, that might have been intentional. Hisashi noted the clear trepidation in All Might's voice at openly referring to the 7th as such. Interesting. He had never called her that aloud before. Hisashi had to wonder what had changed there. A third male voice that took him longer to place as belonging to Salamander chimed in after an awkward pause on the other end. Someone is going to have to call him to at least let him know about the supervillain in our family tree. And someone not me should probably tell Shuichi too, since he won't pick up if I try to call him. As Endeavor groaned, likely in complaint about his sidekick clearly indirectly asking him to do it, Hisashi severed the audio connection and began the process of wiping his digital tracks. That had been rather interesting at least. Perhaps he would do a little digging later into All Might's successor earlier than planned. It was something to consider later. For now, he had funding to secure. Atsuhiro was surprised to watch as one of his own marbles bounced across the floor to young Uraraka's feet. A glance to Takoyami, who had to have tossed it from his own cell, confirmed the request that was being asked for him. With a snap of his fingers, the girl in question was attacked by the formerly compressed drone that was already sparking worryingly. With her sufficiently distracted, he was able to quickly compress the glass wall in front of him, and then the girl before snagging the drone out of the air before Hatsume's device could explode. Takoyami gave him an impressed look. With how fast you did that, I am surprised that you did not escape on your own already. Atsuhiro shrugged. I figured that if I was given up intentionally, I should stay put. How did you drop that marble from your cell? Takoyami pointed up to the metal grating at the top of the cell. Your marble was small enough to fit through the mesh. Dark shadow curled out to perch over his shoulder. I shoved it through. Atsuhiro smiled at them as he removed the door to their cell. Ah, well, it was a job well done by both of you. I take it that this is my cue to break us out. The boy nodded before pulling out a folded-up piece of paper from his boot. Before you compress me to carry us out, read this. Atsuhiro took the note and quickly scanned it. Magician. No need to worry about cameras given that fool has you covered. However, if you would be so kind as to collect all the items tagged by trackers and bring your former guard on your way out, that would be much appreciated. Tower before Atsuhiro could ask, Takoyami handed him the marble he recognized as holding the transponder. The one that would likely explode within a minute of him uncompressing it. Fun. Well, I did say that I wanted a challenge, and breaking out of here unnoticed won't be one. Atsuhiro chuckled before giving a small bow. I am a magician, my dear devil. Vanishing acts are what I do. Honestly, the only trouble will be finding everything before the timer runs out. Yuga gave Asui a relaxed smile as they walked out of the agency the next morning on their patrol. Finally, he would be able to stop pretending to be one of the hero team members. The thought of the freedom from the extra layer of stress he had inflicted upon himself by agreeing to play along with this plot was liberating. He wondered if it would feel the same to come clean with Midoriya about being forced to spy for 𝐴𝐿 when the boy finally admitted to himself that he did actually want to be a villain. Because there was no doubt in Yuga's mind that the other boy would one day have that realization with how he had relaxed so comfortably into the role of villain team leader. Maybe if he was lucky, when the boy eventually went rogue, 𝐴𝐿 would decide he would rather have Yuga spy on Midoriya over spying on Yua. You seem cheerful this morning, Kiro. Yuga flashed the girl another smile before lowering his voice intentionally ineffectively, so that Ida, who was monitoring all comms currently, could still clearly hear him if he had decided to tune in. It is for the civilians' benefit. If they see that we are not worried, they will not worry themselves. She hummed in agreement. But you are worried, Kiro. Oh, horribly so, but alas, that is life. That is why I am trying to think on the bright side of things. For example, we have 3 of the hands sitting in our cells, 2 of which I helped take down personally. Asui gained a thoughtful look. I'm not sure if we should really count Tokoyami and Dark Shadow separately. They are sort of a package deal. What with Dark Shadow being Tokoyami's quirk and all. Yuga frowned. They are very much separate entities, mon ami. Dark Shadow is not even the same gender as Tokoyami. Remember, she gained a real look of realization. Oh, I didn't know that. What are Dark Shadow's pronouns then? They are a gender, so 𝐴𝐿 if you need to. Do most of our class not know? She shrugged. We will have to ask around later. Why do you know, since I am not sure anyone else in the class does? Yuga gave her a puzzled look. I asked. I noticed back during our first week that Tokoyami seemed to favor referring to Dark Shadow exclusively by their name, which seemed a bit excessive at times. Huh. Out of curiosity, outside of the test, would you say that you 3 were friends then? Yuga shrugged, seeing little harm in being honest. Dark Shadow and I, at least, for all that they dislike how I twinkle. I do join them both for lunch quite often. Dark Shadow shares a love for a romance series that I am fond of, so they have been borrowing my books to read while Tokoyami and I eat. Tokoyami, I fear, might be annoyed with me getting his constant companion hooked on the series, though from some of the complaints that he has raised about the 2 of us discussing the ships. Ships? What do boats have to do with anything? That startled a laugh out of Yuga. Relationships, mon ami. I take it from that question, you are not involved in any real fandom spaces online, or surely you would have heard the term in that context before. She gave a small blush. Oh, now I feel silly. Yeah, I don't really get involved with that sort of stuff, even if I am aware that it exists. The romantic relationships of other people, fictional or otherwise, have just never interested me much. Yuga chuckled. That is fair enough. While I personally live for interpersonal drama like that, I am more than aware that it is not everyone's cup of tea, especially given that it really is not Tokoyami's. Before she could respond, a flash of light from an alley signaled that it was finally showtime. Yuga made a show of wiping his head in that direction to spot Midoriya in normal jogging clothes pause in the entrance of an alley before darting inside it as Yuga raised his hand in a point and clicked the comms ping function to get Ida's attention. I just spotted Midoriya in street clothes run into an alley just north of the intersection of King and 4th. 𝗵𝐲𝗏 and I are in pursuit. Copy that. Can't stop twinkling. Backup is heading your way. Don't engage if you can help it. Just keep on his tail. Roger that. He gently shoved Asui to pick up the pace as their performance began. The moment that they were out of sight, Midoriya stopped and held out a hand for Yuga, who happily went boneless as the other boy tossed him over his shoulder to play dead to Asui's wide-eyed amusement. After just a short beat, Midoriya began to speak as they pulled open the door leading up to Sako's apartment. Ah, excellent work strength. If you could carry him for me, that would be appreciated." There was an explosion of shouts over the calms from the heroes before he clicked his tongue chidingly at them. Now, there is hardly any need for that. I'm afraid you will have to wait just a little longer to discover the fate of your missing party. In the meantime, however, I believe you have a more pressing issue. After all, what happened to your prisoners and their guard?" Atsuhiro chuckled to himself as he heard the panicked shouts below him as most of the heroes rushed out down the street from his view out of one of the upper windows. It seemed that their escape was still completely unnoticed, even nearly an hour later. It had taken a little longer than expected, since he had been forced to comb through the evidence locker visually to find everything, since he had barely avoided the transponder blowing up when he had briefly used it to find the general direction of the items near the start. Now to just find a window to crack open enough to marble himself through. Izuku was amused at the slightly gobsmacked look on Sue's face as he dropped Aoyama onto the couch. "How did you do that?" Aoyama pouted at Izuku before giving her a questioning look. "Do what?" "Go limp like that. It was impressive." Izuku hummed. "Wednesday has put a lot of hours into practicing his performance. While it was not likely that we would be seen during that part, I thought it would be better safe than sorry." "Wednesday?" Aoyama flashed her a smile. "It is a reference to the god Odin, who was the original hanged man. Most of us have alternate villain names inspired by our arcana, since some of the names are a bit long, and some wanted to be called something else in more casual settings, since Chance and 𝐸𝐻𝐻 assigned all of our arcana to us from the start. The arcana are more our titles than villain names." Izuku huffed. "I'm not a green Wednesday." Aoyama chuckled. "Well, what else am I supposed to call you? You are the only one who did not pick an actual villain name besides your titles." Izuku considered that. It was a good point. After all, he could hardly go on to operate as a proper villain after the test if he didn't pick something else, or all of his work in the shadows would immediately be linked back to himself. As he blinked back into focus, he saw the look of shock on Sue's face. "I just said that out loud, didn't I?" Aoyama, who Izuku was both unsurprised to see was unbothered by that fact, and annoyed that he wasn't at the same time, chuckled. "Just a bit, mon ami. You can relax, 10 mil. The teachers are clearly more focused on the hero's side of things from the cameras that are active. I just glitched out the camera and took the feed down in a way that corrupted the last couple of seconds before your mess up. Well, Nezu could probably recover the data if he notices right away. So long as he doesn't notice the corrupted footage by the end of the day, it will be gone. Izuku looked back over to Mei, who had been hacking away on her laptop at the dining room table to cover for Atsuhiro's escape. "Thank you." She glazed up to give him a smile. "Of course. What else are girlfriends for but to help you get away with your criminal activity?" "Midoriya, you are seriously considering." "Decided, and yes, I plan on doing some of this for real. Before you freak out, just know that actually hurting people who don't deserve it is not something I am planning on doing. Just overthrowing the current system of doing things to help people more in the long run." Sue gave Aoyama a pointed look. "And you already knew this?" he shrugged. "Technically no, but I had my suspicions." "And you don't see anything wrong with this?" Aoyama's expression crumpled slightly. "To be absolutely frank with you, Midoriya scares me enough that I couldn't care less which side he was on. Just that I know I want to be on it." Izuku flushed. "I'm not that scary, am I?" Aoyama paused as if considering him for a long moment. "Do you want the full list?" "List," Mei snorted. "That means yes." "All right." Aoyama held up a hand and started counting off fingers. "The first time we met, you went from running around like a chicken with no head to totaling the 0-pointer in less than a few seconds, broke 3 out of your 4 limbs in the process, and were clearly planning on breaking the 4th to catch yourself before your Araka slowed your fall. The second, you threw a softball with enough force to shatter a finger, and then instead of going to see Recovery Girl right away, you instead continued with the test. The next day you then nearly brought a building down on yourself for just the chance that you might win. But not only that, but you had the forethought to redirect both your and Bakugo's attacks in such a way to help your teammates several floors above you. Then during the USG attack, you not only picked a fight with the 𝐽𝐻 designed to take out All Might himself, but with Shigaraki, who would have killed you had Snipe not shot him when he did. And don't even get me started with the mess that was the sports festival, or the fact I am like 95% sure that you chose to pick a fight with the hero killer Stain and won. Add all of that to the stuff I have seen and heard you do since this test started, even the planning stages, and can you blame me? Izuku's face felt extremely hot as Aoyama recounted all of that. Oh. Sue seemed to consider all of that. I think you are underselling what happened during the USG. It was his quick thinking that probably saved most of our lives down in the courtyard. Izuku, reminded of the other girl, snapped back to look at her. You are not going to say anything, are you? She considered that. For now, no. I need to think about it. But you are my friend, so I will give you the benefit of the doubt for now. That being said, if you did anything like the bombing in real life, I would not hesitate to inform the other heroes of the truth. Izuku waved her off. I have no plans on hurting anyone innocent, now or in the future. While I might be planning to be a villain, I have no intentions of becoming a monster. Heads up. Nezu is turning on the cameras. Before he could respond, Nezu's voice cracked out of her laptop speakers. Can I inquire what happened to the cameras in here? I was wondering how long it would take you to notice while I was playing with the hero agency cameras. Yes, well done on that hacking, but I do ask that you merely affect the camera feeds locally as opposed to everywhere in the future. I did not appreciate you hiding Sako's movements from us. Izuku looked away from the laptop as the door opened to the apartment to reveal Atsuhiro himself. I'm not too late, am I? Izuku rushed over and pulled Aoyama to his feet. Not yet, but we should move into the vault. It is only a matter of time before the heroes start searching door to door. It took Kaminari checking the street cameras to narrow in on the hands' hiding position. But it wasn't even because they could see them on camera. No, they had found them by following the camera glitches. Ijiro patted him on the shoulder. Great job. I never would have thought to check that, Kaminari shrugged. It isn't that big a deal. Honestly, with how good they are at hacking things, I am surprised they left such a large trail. Bakubro shook his head. No, Shitty Hair is right. I wouldn't have thought to check since I know from the hack earlier that they are better than this. They are getting cocky, so we're starting to slip up. He turned to Ijiro. You leading the raid on the place, or am I? Ijiro straightened his shoulders. I'll do it. I am the team leader after all. Can you start pulling together a team of our heavy hitters? I'm going to check with Kendo on the investigation about what the villains might have done while they were here. Bakubro nodded and slapped the back of Kaminari's chair. Find someone to take over for you and glasses on cameras and phones from our class. At least we know who our spy was now, so all of you idiots are in the clear. Ijiro winced at the reminder of Asui's betrayal. Ida had not been taking that well. Between that and Uraraka's kidnapping, he had stormed off a little while ago to presumably sulk. He found Kendo in the evidence locker. We have a lead on their hideout. You guys figure out what they took, she sighed. Besides the door? No. The problem is we don't fully know what all was in here since no one thought to catalog things after we moved over, so anything missing could either have gotten moved during the move or wasn't brought over in the first place. Ijiro sighed. Well, maybe we will be able to get whatever it was back soon. You want to join the raid? She shook her head. No, one of us should stay here in case your lead is just a diversion to pick off anyone staying behind. I'll hold the fort. Anyone from my class you want to take with your group? Ijiro scratched his head as he had to think about who was left of her class. Bondo maybe? To help with capture? She nodded. Sounds good. She tapped her ear to open up a call over the 1B closed calm network. Pomo, this is Battle Fist. Red Riot is about to lead a raid on a potential villain hideout and wants you along for the ride. Meet him at the doors. 𝐀𝐦 was beginning to get the sinking feeling that he and Uraraka had made a mistake in joining the hero team, without considering the possibility of just who was the villain team leader. In hindsight, Asui as Kirishima's counterpart made sense. Like Kirishima tempered Bakugo's behavior, Asui did the same for Midoriya, at least to a small degree, unlike the rest of their friend group, because let's face it, Midoriya needed to be reined in just as much as Bakugo. 𝐀𝐦 had been worried for a while about the fact that Midoriya was playing villain, but finding out Asui was the one running the show gave him the honestly terrifying realization that everything that had happened so far was with her reining him in. How much worse would this all be going if Midoriya had been left unchecked? Because this was clearly him running things behind the scenes. The fact that the villain team was exploiting a loophole to bring in Midoriya's cousin to the game was all the proof he needed of that, even if he had been hoping he was wrong before. But there was no denying it to himself any longer. The terrifying monster behind the mass bombing was one of his best friends. 𝐀𝐦 was not sure how he felt about that, not with the following realization that this was not the first time he had seen this side of his friend. Just the first time he had been on this side of his dangerous, but controlled wrath. Or with the thought that this was just his friend playing the role. Or with the knowledge that if Midoriya had been behind Tower's speech, his friend had been that badly hurt by hero society, and never admitted that was the case to the rest of the group. 𝐀𝐦 could only hope that he could make things right between all of them at the end of all this, but he worried at this point that perhaps it might be too late to salvage the friendship between Uraraka and Midoriya with how Uraraka had been reacting to the actions of the villain team. There was also the fact that Midoriya was dating Hatsune, which, while 𝐀𝐦 merely considered the other boy's taste in women questionable after his own encounter with her during the sports festival, had hit Uraraka hard. 𝐀𝐦 had to wonder if the reason that Midoriya had hidden the fact they were dating was because of that, or because of the fact he had known about her crush on him and hadn't known how to bring up the fact that he was interested in someone else. With how easily flustered that Midoriya could become around her, 𝐀𝐦 had assumed that the crush was mutual and had just been waiting for them to work that out for themselves. But perhaps he had read that wrong. Midoriya basically never spoke about his life before Yua outside of a few passing mentions of growing up knowing Bakugo. Perhaps he just wasn't used to being friends with a girl. Or at least one like her, given that he seemed more normal around Asui. But to be fair, Asui was a lot more mellow than the rest of the girls in their class. Honestly, 𝐀𝐦 suspected had his older brother's best friend not been Midnight of all people, and the fact that his family had run in similar circles to the Yaoyorozu family growing up, he might have found himself feeling similarly lost at finding himself as such good friends with some of the girls in their class. A thought struck 𝐀𝐦. If Midoriya was the one to write Tower's speech, had he been someone falling into despair and faced abandonment? Was perhaps the reason he had been so secretive about his personal life, not because he was concerned about their feelings, but because of something that had happened when he was younger. Midoriya had always seemed so happy while they were at school together, but was that just a mask he wore? 𝐀𝐦's mind flashed to the fight with Stain and their following stay in the hospital. Midoriya had seemed different afterward, but 𝐀𝐦 had not really thought about it. Still reeling from what had happened because of his own stupid decision to go after Stain. But something had changed in Midoriya, even before the fight, given that he appeared in the fight with a level of control over his quirk that he had just never possessed before. Was the lack of control over his quirk the result of something traumatic that happened when he was younger? It was a fairly well-known issue in hero circles that trauma could lead to quirks breaking under the wrong circumstances. Or the right ones in some cases. Quirk evolution was rare, but certainly not unheard of. Had his friend gone through one? It would explain a lot, even if it did raise more questions. It certainly explained how he could have been struggling so much with his own quirk, even with how much he knew about how quirks worked, and how fast he could figure out the quirks of other people. Habit was hard to break, so if his loss of control was due to him having to relearn old habits of control to compensate for his quirk, Now then, the sudden turnaround with his control during their work studies made sense. But now there was the question of what his quirk had been like before. Whatever the case, Midoriya was clearly not open to talk about it since he had never brought it up. Not yet, at least. Perhaps 𝐀𝐦 could satisfy his curiosity about things by quietly asking Bakugo about things in private. If they had grown up together, perhaps he would know some of the answers, and then 𝐀𝐦 would not have to make Midoriya uncomfortable with a line of questions he clearly would not want to answer himself for now. Classes. Suit up. We have a villain hideout to raid. Speak of the devil. 𝐀𝐦 looked around to check that they were actually alone in the room before grabbing the boy's arm as he turned to leave. Actually, Bakugo, can I talk to you really quickly about something? It has to do with Midoriya. Bakugo immediately frowned but stepped back into the room to close the door. You figured it out too? 𝐀𝐦's brows shot up. That had not been the reaction he was expecting. I'm sorry, what do you mean? Bakugo pinched his nose and shook his head. Forget I said anything. What do you want to talk about Deku for? What was Midoriya's quirk like before you? He went through a quirk evolution, correct? That caught Bakugo clearly off guard as his eyes widened slightly. But there was a hint of something else there. Fear? What brought you to that conclusion? 𝐀𝐦 bit his lip. A lot of small things that make more sense if that were true. His lack of control over his quirk for the first few weeks of class being the main thing. Bakugo stared at him in silence for a long time before shooting a glaze up to the one of the cameras that they could see. Bakugo crossed his arms in a clearly defensive way. He was basically quirkless. Everyone thought he might actually be one. His quirk is a stockpiler, so until he actually fucking stockpiled anything, he was as good as. There is a reason I freaked when he used his quirk back on the first day. It took a bit for me to figure out what exactly happened. But no, he didn't have a quirk evolution. He was just misidentified since his quirk was a mutation from what his parents have. 𝐽𝐸 didn't notice he dropped his pen until the sound of it hitting the table jolted him back into focus. He immediately snapped his head around to Nezu, his hair swirling around his face as he instinctively activated his quirk in anger. The rat had the nerve to pretend to be surprised by this earth-shattering revelation. You tampered with his file. No? What are you? Oh dear. No, I did nothing of the sort, but I would not be surprised to learn that All Might might have done so. No, his misdiagnosis as quirkless should have been clearly noted in his file. Like young Bakugo said, Midoriya's quirk doesn't match either of his parents. I believe it is a re-emergence of his paternal great-grandfather's quirk, but I am still investigating that given his mother's side of the family might have a similar quirk in a more recent generation. 𝐽𝐸's brows shot straight up. You have his mystery father's family tree mapped that far back, Nezu shrugged. After discovering the man's identity as Salamander, it was not hard given he is our number 2's half-brother. More interesting of a discovery was the revelation that their father was the brother of Sir Nightai's mother, which I only realized after noticing a distinct family gene marker that all of them shared with both Midoriya, Shigaraki, and the villain All for One. Harajima frowned. And you didn't want to bring this up in front of All Might because? Nezu sighed. I wanted to make sure I knew the extent to the family tree before I told him because they aren't the only ones I discovered with the gene. Sako at least has it too, which either implies another unknown sibling of Endeavor's father, or, more likely, another unknown child of All for One. Hisashi, who 𝐽𝐸 now saw was doodling a family tree of some sort, paused. That is a hell of a coincidence. How did you find that out? Nezu picked up his tablet to type something. I might have required him to submit a DNA sample to allow him to use his quirk to assist Midoriya with the exam. I had unrelated concerns about him possibly being involved in a few minor crimes after his background check was flagged for villainous sentiments in online posts. While that test cleared him of anything thus far, that was still a nasty shock. He turned it around to show the DNA comparison between the boy and his older cousin. Only a 46% match. It was not that close. but the highlighted sequence on both was a perfect 100%. 𝐲𝐴 frowned. You let a possible actual villain into the test? Nezu flicked his tail in clear amusement. It was my hope that he could get the desire out of his system and not act on it in the real world. To be fair, he is fully aware I know about his inclinations, and I made it perfectly clear that if any of our students were hurt by him during the test, he would be in prison so fast his head would spin. Amusingly, it seems he has clearly chosen to interpret that as needing to keep young Midoriya in check as well, which has most certainly been helpful. 𝐲𝐴 felt the blood drain from his face. You think that this is problem child while acting with restraint? Just how far are you afraid the boy would take things? Nezu shrugged. I am afraid I could only guess. Thankfully, the fact that Midoriya knows we are watching, so I do trust him to keep himself at least partially in check, which is why I am so curious about how he plans to handle the torture goal. What I do know is the boy is playing this game, not only to win but prove to his classmates just what he can do without his quirk. You'll notice that he has barely used his own since the test started. Hazashi drummed his fingers on the table. So what do you think Bakugo meant when he asked if Iida figured too? 𝐲𝐴 was momentarily thrown by the off-topic question, but Nezu clearly wasn't. Oh, he was likely asking if Iida has realized that regardless who are the actual villain team leaders, Midoriya is clearly in charge. Your guess is as good as mine as to why he hasn't brought it up to his own teammates. I have already docked him points for it, assuming he doesn't defect to the villain team at some point during the test. I am not sure when he figured it out, though, which does leave me wondering. I will have to inquire about it after the test. If he figured it out back during the preparation phase, I will return the points on the off chance he kept quiet, thinking that speaking up about it would be cheating because of when he made his discovery. 𝐲𝐴 frowned. That might be it. Both he and Midoriya do live rather close to one another, so there is a chance he overheard something from the villain team members when they were over at Midoriya's place. I don't think he plans to switch sides. With how upset he was back at the sports festival with Todoroki for throwing their fight, I think he is looking forward to having a proper fight with either him or Midoriya. Katsuki glared at the fucking blast door in the middle of the apartment that they had found the villains working out of. And it had to be their secret base, and not just some random apartment from the fact that was there. And the walls? Glasses shook his head at Shitty Hair's question. It's no good. The reinforcement is consistent all around the room, including from the floor above. We might be able to get in by tunneling under them, but that might take a while. If I had to guess, the room was built with support students, and their devices possibly exploding in mind. Dun's face poked at the biometric reader. Yeah, I am not sure I can get into this. It looks like one of the hardened readers from the main campus. I don't want to short it and risk actually trapping them in there. Katsuki put his gloved hand against the door seam and put a finger on the pull pin on his gauntlet. You all might want to get clear. I am going to go all out on it to try and crack the door open. 𝐲𝐴 frowned. Should we stop him? Harajima snorted. Nah. It will hold. I designed the damn room to be Hatsume-proof, so she couldn't get in without authorization. It being explosion-proof, and therefore Bakugo-proof goes without saying. Honestly, using the lab as a safe room that only they could get into was pretty clever on the villain team's part. True to prediction, the explosion only served to knock Bakugo back away to slam through the far wall from the reflection of force back and knock him out. Hisashi winced. Ooh, that's gotta hurt. Nezu sighed and started typing on his tablet before turning on his microphone to speak. From how Kirishima perked up on the screen from where he had been checking on Bakugo, it was his earpiece. I am going to go ahead and save your team more self-injury and inform you that you will not be able to get into that room with the quirks you have access to. Recovery Girl will be arriving at your headquarters to check over Bakugo shortly. Ijiro gave the camera in the alley above them that he could see a thumbs up. Copy that. He turned to Ridiko. Sugarman, You think you can carry 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝐬 back to base? He nodded. Yeah, I can do that. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 turned back to the others. Okay, new plan. We can't get into where they are, but they can't stay there forever, so we are going to keep a watch on the door. Who wants to stay here? Ida immediately raised his hand. If only one or two of us is to remain. It would probably be best if one of them is me in case we need to make a strategic retreat, since I am the only one on our team remaining who stands a chance of outpacing Midoriya, if 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝐬 is not an option. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 frowned. You sure? I mean, you would be fighting your friends. Ida nodded. It's fine. As I discussed with Midoriya and Todoroki before we signed up for the teams, there are no hard feelings about fighting one another. I knew what I was getting into by joining the hero team if they picked the villain one. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 bit his lip, unsure. Even now, knowing Asui is the villain team leader, Ida gave a small, noncommittal shrug. In hindsight, I should have been more suspicious about that, especially with Mayuntha being clearly targeted at the start. But no, it should be fine. All right, if you're sure. Just keep your calm open. Will do. Nezu watched Mike scratch his chin. Am I the only one who is picking up on Kirishima being suspicious of Ida? Aizawa sighed and shook his head. No, I am getting that too. Problem child recruiting Asui has clearly given him trust issues with Midoriya's friend group. I hope that isn't a long-term issue for him and the rest of the hero team after the test is over. The last thing we need is the class dividing permanently with the threat of the league possibly targeting them again. Shuichi cursed as he quickly ripped his new mask off. Just a second. Even without him speaking, he knew who was on the other side of the door from the reactions of his neighbors as he had been walking up. Of course, of all the times his uncle, who had barely ever acknowledged his existence, turned up at his own place. It was literally when he was trying out his villain costume for the first time. Shuichi tossed all the identifiable stain cosplay into a kitchen cabinet before ripping the door open to see the number 2 hero in full costume, glaring at his neighbors, sneaking pictures of him with a tall, thin blonde stranger in a poorly fitted yellow suit. Oh, for fuck's sake. Get in here before actual paparazzi turn up. His uncle just rolled his eyes and gestured for the thin man to enter first. You ignored my phone call. Shuichi huffed as he slammed the door closed behind them. Not because he wanted to, but because the stupid door wouldn't close unless he did. I was still asleep. I figured I would call you back around lunchtime like I normally would. What did my father do this time to warrant you turning up like this when you clearly are supposed to be patrolling? And who's the suit? His uncle sighed and deactivated his quirk before gesturing to the stranger. Shuichi, Yagi Toshinori. Yagi has been digging into our family tree because of your younger half-brother, that no, I did not know about until yesterday, and neither did your father. He is the boy's other uncle. Shuichi felt his eyebrows rise at that. Okay. And why does that matter? It is not exactly like the fact I might not actually be an only child is some sort of huge revelation. Yagi sighed. It unfortunately matters due to the recent discovery of the original identity of the proclaimed leader of the League of Villains and the subsequently discovered connection to an extremely dangerous supervillain that is suspected to be the real mastermind behind the group. It is only a matter of time until the connection is made public knowledge. I am going straight from here afterwards to similarly warn Sir Nightai, who is apparently both your father and Inji's cousin on their father's side, and his mother's, which is how we never made the connection before now. If Shuichi's brows had not already been raised, they would have shot up through the ceiling now. He looked between them confused. Inji? Not Todoroki? His uncle snorted. Of course that is what you focus on. Yagi gave him an amused smile. To be fair, he is probably just confused by your choice to use my family name over my given one when I used yours. His uncle shot Yagi a pointed look. I am still getting used to even knowing your civilian identity, Yagi. Give me a few days to wrap my head around that, and I might change that. Shuichi decided at that point to just give up being surprised. He gestured to the blonde. So he is secretly a hero's alter ego or something. Okay, whatever. What's so important about who Shigaraki actually is? It took a flash of confusion on both their faces to realize his slip-up. His uncle's gaze hardened. How do you know that name? The names of the members of the League of Villains hasn't been made public knowledge yet due to the current ongoing investigation. Shuichi scrambled quickly for an unsuspicious answer. He ended up settling for a less suspicious one than the truth of his plan to try to join by asking around. I was following the Stain stuff online just out of curiosity about what people were saying, and someone online identified the guys on the roof watching the Namu attack in Hasu as Shigaraki and Kurogiri from the League of Villains. Hold on, let me get my phone. I might be able to find the roller post since I reblogged it. Spinner-off Tales Game Over 4 Heroes _𝐀𝐦 𝐍𝐴 for those wondering. The guys on the roof from that news footage are definitely Shigaraki and Kurogiri from the SG attack #Hasu incident #Shigaraki Tamura #Kurogiri #League of Villains #love #Yua hero course #class Wanna #Deku #bone breaking kid wonder if they were trying to get spotted by the cameras so we would know they were behind things it was not like they hid from the cameras They could have just dipped after letting the monsters loose. Yagi's brows shot up as he took the phone from Shuichi's hands. It looks like someone you are following is following your brother's account. It looks like he was the original source. I will have to talk to him about that. Wait, the bone-breaking kid is my brother? Yagi winced and nodded as he passed the phone back. Yes. Is that really how he is known to the public at large? Shuichi snorted as he clicked on 𝐀𝐦 𝐍𝐴's name to open his blog and started strolling for the last picture of himself he had posted. Well, on roller at least, but assuming that is actually his account. He is memeing on the fact he breaks his bones all the time himself, so I don't think he really cares that other people do. You know, now that I actually look at him again, I am not surprised to hear we are actually related. He does kind of look like a small green version of our father. Back to the Shigaraki thing. What is so important about who he actually is? It is not like we are connected in any way. Yet anyways, his uncle and Yagi shared a look. About that, Yuga shifted his hands slightly at their place behind his back in the quirk suppression cuffs. I am ready, mon ami. Midoriya gave him a smile before shooting Asui, who was now dressed in a copy of his tower costume, an apologetic look. Just remember, this is all an act and stick with the script showing on the inside of the mask that May sends you. We've all rehearsed this a bunch of times. We are not actually going to be hurting him. She gave a calm smile. I believe you. She turned on the voice modulator and placed the tower mask over her face. I think Uraraka has been waiting to join us for long enough. Sako nodded and tossed her marble at the chair beside him and released her with a snap. While she was still disoriented, Midoriya quickly overpowered her and got a set of cuffs on her, binding her to her chair before more casually wrapping a band-aid over one finger on each hand. She shook her head to clear it. Wa Aoyama, he gave her his best, freaking out smile. Oh dear, so they got you too. That is rather unfortunate. Midoriya walked over and took a fake punch at the side of his head. Yuga snapping his head to the side, as if hit harder than the light tap used to transfer the bruise powder that was invisible on the outside of his black gloves. Shut up. He turned his masked face back to her before pointing to her. That goes for you too. Yuga watched as an indignant look flashed over her face. Deku? I thought you said the reason that you joined the villains was because they promised to not just use you as just muscle. Asui turned her head slightly from where she had been standing beside Hatsune, as she rapidly typed at the front of the room, next to the cameras that Tokoyami had been assisting with setting up as Sako uncompressed the many cables. We have. He was essential with the planning phase before the game started. After all, our fool and magician here would not have joined us otherwise. Nor judgment, I suspect. Dark shadow peeled away from Tokoyami to drape themselves over her. Oh, Don't forget he was the one who helped unite the classes against the hero scum. 𝐻𝐻𝐬𝐬 sighed. Dark Shadow, please do not call our classmates that. I know you are having fun playing the villain, but that seems excessive. 𝐬𝐡𝐢 laughed. The sound warped to reassemble Midoriya's deepened one. There is nothing wrong with not wanting to break character while in front of the enemy team. Devil. Lover is not hurting anyone by having their fun. Yuga cleared his throat, pulling Uraraka's attention back to him. Why all the cloak and dagger still, 𝐬𝐢? Surely it is obvious that it is you under there to the heroes now with how you grabbed me. He caught Uraraka stiffening out of the corner of his eye as 𝐬𝐢 made a show of sighing before pulling off the mask to show her face. That's probably true. Still, Death would be disappointed if we backed off with the theatrics before the final act and grand reveal. Hero. When Uraraka's voice came out, it was weak. 𝐬𝐢, you are the one behind all this? She shook her head. No, Kiro, it has been a team effort. To answer your real question though, the idea for dividing the city was actually Midoriya's idea, and the how was partially Todoroki and partially Hatsume's ideas. But the snipers after the initial attack were Class 1B. This kidnapping though was mostly Takoyami and our hanged man's plan. And before you ask, no, I am not revealing their identity just yet, even if my own has been revealed. Yuga made a show of pouting at Takoyami and Dark Shadow. The two of you are horrible best friends. If I had known that all our weeks of enjoying lunch together would lead to this, I wouldn't have shared my volumes of Mew Mew Kissy Cutie with you. Takoyami snorted. I wish you hadn't. Dark Shadow gave a dramatic gasp and recoiled back to perch on Takoyami's shoulder. Take that back. Midoriya broke into a laugh, unable to keep a straight face at that bit of improv on their parts before patting him on the shoulder. Thanks for being a good sport about all of this, but you are ruining the mood. Yuga flashed him a smile. I should be thanking you for at least warning me about your plans for me. He made a show of shrugging, getting back on script. Well, the rules state we can't do any long-term damage. I figured psychological damage probably counted in Aizawa Sensei's book. Uraraka stiffened. Wait, warned him about what? 𝐬𝐢 just gave her a smile and put the mask back on, turning to Hatsume. Are we ready to begin? Ijiro had just made it back to the headquarters when all the screens inside lit up with an icon of a black-gloved hand holding a fan of cards with the English word fate printed on the exposed backs. The familiar sound of Hatsume from the sports festival rang out over the speakers. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Are we coming in loud and clear on your end, pitiful heroes? Ijiro grimaced at the sound. She sounded way too happy pretending to a villain. Kaminari cursed next him and brought a hand up to his headset. Damn it. How does she keep doing that? She gave a maniacal laugh. Don't bother, 𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐿. I have your systems fully locked down under my control. A sigh came from the other side of the call before Midoriya spoke up. I think they get the picture, 𝐬𝐢. You should probably turn on the camera now. Oh, right. The screen changed to reveal an image of Tower standing in front and between Aoyama and Uraraka seemingly tied down to chairs, and they in turn were flanked with Midoriya and Takoyami with Sako directly behind to complete the triangle. Behind her. 𝐬𝐢 tilted her head slightly before speaking with a deep, smooth, modulated voice. Can they see us? A pause. Ah, good. Hello, heroes. It's time to play a game called Hostage Negotiations. Ijiro winced as he heard Hagakure shout from down the hall. We don't negotiate with terrorists, 𝐬𝐢. Ah, how unfortunate. I am sure that the HPSC representative will hate to hear that. With a snap of her fingers, another video picture appeared inset in the bottom corner. One showing a very bored-looking actor sitting on a chair in a cage with two of the hands outside that he eventually placed as being the sun and moon Kaibara and Kurwara, who looked to be playing cards with him. After a beat, the pair of hands stiffened and shot up to their feet to stand at attention at either side of the cage as Death strolled into the shot, flanked by Judgment Shinso, Temperance Todoroki, and Wheel of Fortune Monoma. Under the mask of Death, 𝐜𝐡𝐢𝐬 sweated from nerves. He might have known for a few weeks that he was going to play Monama's double for this, but after he heard about Asui flipping sides and taking over for Gyro for playing as Midoriya's double, he had sort of been hoping that someone from 1B might jump ship and be able to take over for him. It wasn't that he didn't know he could do it, but the worry he could still screw up was there. He turned his head slightly to meet the gaze of the actor who had been a pretty good sport about his kidnapping. "It seems your time has come early. The heroes have chosen to abandon you." A voice rang out over their earpieces from the audio feed from an agency. "Wait, 𝐬𝐍𝐵 doesn't speak for all of us. What do you want?" Yosu turned his head to face the camera. "What do you think? I wish for you to make a choice. A life for a life. Let's say in this case, 𝐬𝐻𝐸 for the representative perhaps." Ochako stiffened as Death's voice rang out around on their earpieces. So this was how she was set to die in this screwed-up game. As she opened her mouth to say, well, she didn't know what she was going to say. Deku covered her mouth before leaning over to whisper in an unnervingly familiar smooth tone completely unmodulated. "Don't say anything. This is a choice for the hero leaders to decide between classes A and B." She felt tears beating up in the corners of her eyes at the truth of what was really happening hit her. Despite what Aoyama and the others thought on their team, it wasn't really Asui behind things. It was Deku who was the real tower. Which meant that the Death speaking in their ears was probably not the real one, but another double, and she was seated right in front of them. Hatsune frowned, unseen behind her mask. That was weird. There was a brand new backdoor into the comms channels that was just listening in. When she wasn't too busy in a bit, she could probably trace the signal back, while she waited for 10 mil to give her the signal to go to the next phase of the plan. It could probably wait 30 minutes. Hisashi was only slightly freaking out as he picked up his own voice, dripping off All Might's successor's lips. It had been a bad enough shock, hearing it coming from a voice modulator, when he had first tuned into the UA audio channels. But that hadn't been a case of voice manipulation from the lack of audio artifacting. Just the boy's voice going deeper as he lowered it. Sure, it wasn't quite as low as his own voice yet, but given the boy's otherwise clearly prepubescent voice, it was only a matter of time until he hit that range for real. What the hell? Asui winced as she saw the next part of her script pop up with how long the heroes were clearly taking to argue about what to do. "Perhaps I can provide a stronger motivation to make a decision quickly. Strength, if you would be so kind." There was a sickening noise behind her of breaking bones, followed by a scream from the direction of Aoyama after Midoriya and Tokoyami quickly switched places. She really hoped that they were playing an audio recording and Midoriya had not actually broken either of their bones. She hated that she couldn't have put it past him to do either. She clicked her tongue following directions as the heroes really freaked out, shouting over one another that they were breaking the rules. Now, damage is fair game so long as it is within Recovery Girl's ability to heal it without creating permanent damage. Don't worry, Strength knows exactly how much damage he can do. There was another horrible crack and scream. She closed her eyes as she fought down the urge to be sick. Thankfully, she didn't have anything else to do until the other team made a decision. There was another snap and scream. 𝐻𝐸 felt the blood draining from his face as Midoriya seemed to dislocate Aoyama's shoulder. "We need to stop this." Nezu fucking chuckled. "There is no need." As Midoriya reassured Asui before they began, "It is all an act." He flicked a file over from his tablet to 𝐻𝐸's. A medical record. They are taking advantage of Aoyama's previously broken collarbone to simulate breaking his shoulder. And if you look carefully from the room's security cameras, none of Midoriya's hits are actually making full contact, just breaking the swapped, more fragile costume pieces. 𝐻𝐸 closed his eyes and flipped the tablet down. "I know. That is not what I mean. They are psychologically torturing all of the remaining hero students. We need to stop them." Nezu just sighed. Ijiro was relieved as Nezu's voice crackled over the radio. "That is enough, Midoriya. The opposing team gets the point. Midoriya pulled away from the broken form of Aoyama, who was shaking violently in his seat, one shoulder drooping in an unnatural way. He pulled his mask off for a second to reveal his face. Not that there had been any question. It was really him from the sight of his quirk in use to stick his tongue out at a security camera. Killjoy. He then promptly pulled out a gun and shot Aoyama in the chest. There, he's dead. Now he can leave to go meet Recovery Girl. Enough of this. Asui pulled out her own and pointed it at Uraraka and pulled the trigger, paint exploding over her chest as well. Death's voice rang out in clear disapproval. Tower, she huffed. They were taking too long to decide, so I decided for them. They sighed. That is not how this works, Tower. She shrugged. We can just kidnap another one of them and try again later. Fool, cut the feed to the heroes. The screens all went dark. Nezu released his paw off the mic as a wild grin spread over his face. Oh, that was clever. Using the mechanics of the game against them. Aizawa rubbed his face. What are you talking about now? Nezu tapped away at his tablet as he took notes. Aoyama has bulletproofing in his chest armor, so getting shot there doesn't count as a death. But as far as the hero team currently knows from the act, he is considered dead like Uraraka. Now he can walk straight out with her past any guard that the heroes have set up, and she can't say he is actually not dead. Using Sako's quirk, he can carry them all out. Mike gave an impressed whistle. Damn, that is clever. Not only are they getting a free escape from the hero team's plan to grab them when they leave, but that also crosses of the whole convincingly fake one of their members' deaths thing and filming a murder. Shit. All that is left is actually successfully ransoming their hostage and killing the rest of the hero team members, right? Majima snorted. If that live stream is anything to go off of, they are going to go for a 2-for-1 on that one too, by making the hero teams have to agree to trade one of their team members' lives for the commission rep stand-ins. Aizawa dropped his head down onto the table in clear emotional exhaustion. And the hero team members know it too. Midoriya, intentionally or not, is driving a new wedge between the inner and outer circles of the trusted heroes. Nezu gave the man a cheerful smile. Oh, it is clearly intentional on his part. Midoriya has clearly inherited All-for-One's tendency of being rather thorough in planning for how the enemy responds to his actions. I will have to speak with both you and All Might after the test finishes about making arrangements for additional lessons with myself to see about teaching him how to view and use that skill for hero work. Not just a tool for this little game. The last thing we need is for him to later decide to make use of those skills for less than legal plans out of boredom. That snapped Aizawa back up to full attention. You actually think Problem Child might go villain on us? Nezu sighed and made to pour himself a new cup of tea. Had you asked me this time yesterday, my opinion would have remained what I told All Might before I had him removed. That despite the clear blood connection to All for One, I trusted the boy's desire to become a hero in the same vein as All Might to keep his distaste for the current way things operate in check. Unfortunately, or perhaps if you look at it in a certain way, allowing the test to continue has allowed me to discover I grossly misunderstand the way the boy's mind works. While I still doubt he would ever become a villain of the same variety as All for One himself with how close he is personally with All Might, I would not be terribly surprised if after this test finishes, there is at a bare minimum a new vigilante running around. The fact the boy is willing to pull this level of psychological manipulation on his classmates, while he still believes he is under active observation by All Might himself, shows that the boy's fears of disappointing the hero he looks up to the most are grossly outranked by his clear drive to make this game scenario as real as possible. As it stands, I am currently hoping that desire comes from a place of wanting his classmates to understand just what they will be facing out in the real world as full heroes, but the fact I don't know for sure is still concerning. Fuck. Indeed. Midoriya didn't even bother unlocking the cuffs around Yuga's wrists. He just snapped the connector between with his quirk before he was flying around the room to help his cousin and the others pack. Yuga rolled his shoulder back into place before taking the key that Hatsune tossed at him to start unlocking himself. Uraraka, you remember that as someone dead, you can't talk, correct? She stared at him in shock as he stood up on his broken leg with no discomfort. Wah? He smiled at her and wagged a finger at her before moving to begin freeing her. No talking. To answer your real question, allow me to introduce myself. I am the mysterious hanged man. Now if you can be a good girl and play along, my real team, and I would very much appreciate it. That snapped her out of her shock. What is going on? Asui reached over to give her a reassuring pat on the back as she pulled off her mask, voice changer now off for what should be for good. I'm sure someone will explain after Recovery Girl escorts you out. The short version is that the villain team is going for a perfect score, since the teachers didn't stop the test as soon as the villain team had scored more points. Then the hero team could possibly make up the difference and win, even if they somehow caught all the members. Just be glad that we took you out of the game like this, Kiro. Some of the team from 1B really wanted to draw out your death in the game to get back at you for causing Midoriya's panic attack the other night. Sako shoved a handful of marbles into Yuga's hands that he was quick to palm like he had been trained. Remember to close the door behind you. Yuga gave the man a smile. Of course, see you in 30. He reached out to compress Asui. In 30. He compressed himself. Yuga quickly picked up the last 2 marbles, palming them as well as he straightened up. All right, 𝐸, if you will follow me, I'll lead you to the recovery point. Right this way. Ochako left the room in a daze. A panic attack? When had she? She returned Ida's sad smile and wave with her own dazed one as she and the apparent secret traitor Aoyama walked out past him with Aoyama faking a limp arm over her shoulder, before spiraling back into her thoughts. When had she done anything to cause Deku to have one of those? Oh, the phone call. Right. If Deku was the real tower, then that meant that she had yelled at him for what had happened with the bombings. Oh. She had ended her friendship with him, hadn't she? Told him that she would never trust him as a friend again for pulling that stunt. And she hadn't been lying. She didn't trust him anymore. Not knowing that he could ever consider manipulating all of them like this just to win. Or anyone on the villain team for that matter, since none of them had clearly tried to stop him. And from how Aoyama cheerfully acted when there were no active hero team members' eyes on him anymore. From how he acted as they parted ways, her finishing the walk to the exit, and him disappearing down an open manhole cover that closed up behind him, immediately showing that another team member had been waiting for him just out of sight down there. She didn't come back into focus until Zero came to greet her at the door of the room that Recovery Girl led her to. She wasn't lying about the 1B students, you know. Monoma was absolutely pissed with you about what happened with Midoriya, so spent a good chunk of that night after Recovery Girl sent him to bed early planning alternative ways for you to get taken out in more gruesome ways. It was to the point that Midoriya had to change plans to take you out early before they went behind his back to get back at you, so I would be careful around them on campus once this is all over. She blinked as she processed that. How do you know that? You weren't dead yet. The only other girl in the room, one of the 3rd years that had died in the bombing, waved at her. We told him what was going on after he noticed them conspiring behind Midoriya's back yesterday. Welcome to the Dead Club. Shuichi had to sit down. So let me get this straight. All of us are related to what is considered the most dangerous supervillain of all time, who everyone thought All Might killed about 6 years ago, until Shigaraki, who is apparently cousins with my little brother on both sides of the family, turned up with his League of Villains, which has a bunch of monsters with multiple quirks, which means that All for One is actually still kicking, since he is the only one with the ability to move quirks around like that. Fucking All Might nodded. Yeah, he got why Endeavor was still struggling with that one now, at least. That is the gist of it, at least. Shuichi pressed his palms together as he felt his control slipping on his quirk in his shocked state. Not wanting to accidentally stick himself to his kitchen table, they were now all sitting around. That would just be embarrassing. So Stain was definitely not working with those guys then? His uncle snorted. No, the whole Shigaraki wanting to kill Yagi thing was likely not appealing to Stain. From what I have been told since taking him in, before he turned hero killer, he was a fairly well-known Volante by the name of Stendhal, who was rather well known for cleaning up after the mistakes of what he considers fake heroes. An ideology that has decayed to the point of now just boiling down to only All Might and Deku as being true heroes and the rest of us being fakes. He actually killed one of the Namu to save your brother from being carried off to possibly be further harmed by the League after he, Shoto, and one of their classmates survived a fight with him. Shuichi perked up at that. So the rumor that you didn't actually take him down is true. The kids did. His uncle looked wonderfully uncomfortable with the question. I was pressured into taking credit for the takedown by the local heroes, police, UA, and the commission. Technically, only Shoto had permission to fight with his quirk during the incident, though your brother's supervising hero retroactively granted the boy permission as well. Despite disobeying his order to stay put when he learned the reason the boy ran off was because he knew one of his classmates was in the area, and he immediately sent out an SOS to all of his phone contacts when he realized that his missing classmate had stumbled into Stain right as he was about to get his head chopped off, who himself had found Stain as he was about to kill Native. Unfortunately for them, given that Native was still conscious, what normally would have been a legal exception to act with their quirks, even without permission, became illegal vigalism due to them refusing to follow his direction to run away and abandon him. The whole thing is idiotic since they clearly were right to refuse, since they not only saved his life, but made it possible to take Stain in. At the very least, Shoto should have gotten credit for the takedown, but he refused to take it without the other two boys getting it as well, so I got stuck with it. That actually got a look of surprise from All Might. Wait, Gran Torino would have let him get away with the vigilantism? He never would have done that for me. Shuichi was glad that the number one hero's sudden sulking seemed to surprise his uncle too. Who is he anyway? I had not even heard of him until he turned up kicking a Namu I was fighting in the head. All Might made a strange face. My mother's former hero partner. After all, for one, killed her. He was my legal guardian for a few months, until I was legally an adult myself, after which he chucked me on the first flight overseas to America and cut contact until Izuku showed up in the sports festival when he called me to demand an expansion as to why I hadn't called him for help teaching him to stop breaking all his bones since I clearly was over my head. Our relationship is complicated. Shuichi stared at him for a moment before it clicked that neither All Might or his uncle got what was actually happening there, since neither of them clearly grew up with grandparents. So this Gran Torino raised you, even if only for a little bit, right? And you have been the closest thing to a father figure to Izuku as his uncle, right? Yes? That is just the grandparent effect at work. Crazy strict with their own kids, but would let their grandkids get away with murder. I know that grandfather Todoroki died before either you or my father had kids, but I would not have been surprised if he spoiled the shit out of us. My mom's parents definitely did for me. She used to complain about how often they would let me stay up until stupid o'clock in the morning playing games when she sent me to stay with them when she and father were fighting, when she had always had such a strict bedtime. It is a pretty common thing from what I have heard online. As his uncle seemed to process this, All Might seemed to rapidly go through the stages of grief. Shit. Inko felt extremely awkward as she walked into the night agency. A full hour before her recently discovered brother had agreed to meet her there to bring his former sidekick up to speed. But she was worried that if she waited until Toshinori was with her, that she would never be able to work up the courage to ask her question. Not with Toshinori right there in front of her, knowing how badly it would hurt him if it came up. She had to know if he knew, and tell him if he did not. The young woman behind the desk was clearly another hero working for the man that was evidently her late brother's brother-in-law. Hi, how can I help you? Inko fidgeted with a briefcase that held all of their compiled notes into the mess that was their family that they had found so far awkwardly. Is Sir Naita in? I have a matter I need to speak to him about, a private matter related to his sister Shimura now and her family. The woman's eyes widened slightly before she picked up the landline next to her. Sir, there is a woman here asking to speak to you about something related to your sister. From the questioning tone as she trailed off, she had likely not known that the man was not an only child. No. She only mentioned that your sister's name was Shimura now. Hold on, I'll ask. She lowered the phone. What was your name? You didn't say. 𝐬𝐻𝐦 gave the woman an apologetic smile. Sorry. It is Midoriya 𝐬𝐻𝐦, but you should probably tell him that my birth family name was Shimura. His sister married my biological brother, from what I have pieced together over the past 24 hours. The woman's eyes somehow widened further before she quickly passed the information along. He said to send you straight up. Just go through those doors there to get to the elevator, and got up to the 3rd floor. His office is directly at the end of the hallway the elevator will open up to. 𝐬𝐻𝐦 gave her a small bow of thanks and was quick to depart. She only had an hour before Toshinori got here after all. Murray stared at the phone he had just replaced on the receiver. Whoever this woman was, she was a creative liar, though not as well informed about who he was as she clearly thought, or was at least pretending to be. After all, unless you counted Toshinori, whose claim was dubious at best, even Shimura Nana's successor, his brother-in-law had been an only child. Plus, there was the issue of his sister, and the rest of her family having been killed in a villain attack, alongside their parents well over a decade ago. There were no more loose ends there, sadly, outside of hiding the event from Toshinori to save his dear friend from suffering from the same heartbreak from the news, even if he had never known Kotaro personally. To be fair, neither had Murray, since he himself had largely cut contact from his sister and their parents when he decided to get into heroics to try and prevent they from being targeted by any enemies that he would make as All Might's sidekick. He sighed. It had been a nice thought, but a pointless waste. All for One had killed them anyway after all. It just figured of all the people she could have married, now had picked someone already on All for One's list of targets. He shook his head to rid it of that sad train of thought. It was an interesting choice of the mystery woman to try and create a fake link between the Shimuras and All Might's poor choice of successor, though. It was honestly so utterly ridiculously of a thing to make up that it clearly had been done to get his own attention. So imagine his surprise when the woman who walked through his office door was definitely the boy's actual mother, a woman he had been nebulously aware of for years, even before Toshinori had made his mistake of choosing her son. She didn't even bother stopping to greet him before she was shoving a letter into his hands, and the picture of All for One that had been inside it fell out face up on the desk. You should start by reading this. Hisashi was spiraling slightly as he processed his discovery and the revelation of just what he had missed by not paying more attention to All Might's conversation yesterday. The supervillain in the family tree, not villain. They had been talking about himself. He was a grandfather. A grandfather multiple times over. Tamura was not just Shimura's grandson to be manipulated to be body snatched at some later date, if need be, but his own great-great-grandson to be raised and cared for. The fourth had been his son. He needed to course correct immediately. He wasn't going to let Tamura kill his own cousin unknowingly. Hisashi froze as another smaller realization hit him. Something more controllable. Something to help himself regain his own footing. He clicked on his microphone connection to the bar. Tamura, I hope I am not interrupting, but I thought you would like to know why you couldn't contact Mr. Compress. Tamura, who had apparently been sulking about the lack of interest on the part of other villains about joining him, perked up at his normal place at his bar. You found him. A small mischievous smile flickered over his own face as he realized just how he could break the news about his cousin. Or, well, cousins, since there was also the Todorokis to consider. Yes, it seems he was being less than truthful about why he wanted to join your group for your next planned attack. Here, let me show you. He threw the live camera feed of the villain team's hideout, where Izuku was trading costume accessories with the frog-quirked girl as Sako recounted his troubles recovering his targets in the hero team headquarters before escaping to a few of the currently unbusy members of the team. Not certain I could have found them all had Izu not ensured that we all memorized everyone else's items. Tamura perked up in clear curiosity. Wait, why are he and all the hero brats dressed up like that? Team Unity, I assume. Yua is in the middle of their final exam, which is an exercise based on the idea of a game of heroes versus villains. All Might's successor Midoriya Izuku there is the villain team leader. I assume from the fact that Mr. Compress is there. They found a loophole in the rules to let actors join their team and had him infiltrated the acting group. Tamura unconsciously scratched at the side of his neck. So he and Greenie have a history. He called him Izu, which sounds pretty familiar. They are cousins, but I wouldn't exactly count that against him given that both Izuku and Todoroki Shoto, there are also yours. Tamura stiffened. What? Hisashi's smile widened. Yes, the fact that both All Might's successor and the current number 2 hero are my descendants is a rather amusing discovery, though admittedly I really should have suspected the latter sooner. He could practically hear the gears turning in his grandson's head. Wait, does that mean that I'm my great-great-grandson? Yes, but that has never really been in question, he lied. No reason for him to not pretend that his choice of naming Tamura his successor was intentional since his old plans were well and truly out the window. Has that really never come up? No, Sensei great-great-grandfather. Sensei is still fine, Tamura. It is less of a mouthful. Besides, it would be more beneficial to your reputation as a villain if you were to keep your name separate from my own. Less accusations that you only got as far as you did because you were riding on my reputation as your own. Tamura seemed to nervously fidget with his energy drink can that he had been nursing when Hisashi had called in as he glanced over at Kurogiri, who had been listening to their conversation in silence. But I have been using your connections, Hisashi hummed. Just my connection to the doctor and Jiren, and both of them you would have met on your own soon enough regardless. The doctor would have reached out to you by now even had I not taken you in personally, since he has an interest in the descendants of the One for All holders and the effects it may or may not have had on their quirks. That was what led him to Kurogiri after all. I'm sure that as soon as he learned of your desire to kill All Might, he would have reached out and connected you two regardless. As for Jiren, he wouldn't be as friendly with you if he didn't actually like you. You did make a rather large impression on him the first time you met a year ago. That actually provoked a reaction from the advanced Namu. Pardon? Ah, yes, I suppose that you wouldn't know that. Your biological paternal grandfather was the 6th holder, the hero Smoke Eater. Tamura quickly cut in. No, wait, back the fuck up. Are you saying I am also related to one of the previous holders too? That caught Hisashi off guard, because he did know that Tamura knew about all the previous holders, and therefore about his grandmother at least. Yes, 2 actually, though given that the fact we are related had somehow not come up. I was only expecting you to know about the one connection. Tamura. Do you actually not remember? Tamura had jumped up to his feet now, his form laced with directionless aggression. Do I not remember what? What the hell are you talking about? Hisashi felt slightly sick as details that he had brushed off as unimportant due to his former plans about Tamura, and his unstable quirk clicked into place. Tamura, what was your birth name? Tamura gave a violent flinch. What the fuck are you asking? My name is Shigaraki. No. Tamura gave another violent flinch as Hisashi cut him off. That is your name now, but it was not the one you were born to. You don't remember. I don't remember what? Hisashi rubbed his face where his eyes had once sat. There was no good way to handle this. Kurogiri, could you come here please? Hisashi had to wonder if the swiftness in the Namu's compliance was due to his programming or a sense of self-preservation, given that Tamura's control was slipping to the point of his quirk starting to eat through his shoes. Tamura snarled at one of the cameras. "What are you trying to hide from me?" Hisashi took a deep breath and told him,